Chapter 1. The Night of Flames and Chains. The village of Palmyra's Edge existed in that forgotten space where the green world ended and endless desert began. A place of date palms clustered around a precious spring, mud brick houses huddled like sleeping camels seeking warmth. Here, 15-year-old Kaveh lived his restless youth, his body caught between boyhood and manhood, his heart full of dreams that visit all young men standing at life's threshold. The evening began like any other. The merciless sun sank below the horizon in crimson and gold. Air that had shimmered with heat all day cooled and became almost gentle. The scent of baking bread drifted from clay ovens, mingling with sweet dates and earthy spring water. Kaveh sat outside his family's home, back against still warm mud brick, watching first stars emerge. His father Rashid sat nearby, repairing a leather water bag with practiced ease. His mother Almira sang softly inside, grinding spices, her voice carrying melodies older than memory. "You're restless tonight," his father observed. "Your eyes keep turning to the horizon." Kaveh smiled sheepishly. "I was thinking about grandmother's stories, about great warriors of old, heroes who fought jinn and saved kingdoms." Rashid tied off his thread and looked at his son. In fading light, his eyes held understanding and sadness. Heroes in stories never mention the price of glory. They don't speak of mothers who weep, or fields left untended, or simple joy of bread shared with those you love. He paused. "There is courage in peaceful living too, my son." Before Kaveh could respond, his younger sister Zara came running, dark braids flying. "Father, Kaveh, old merchant Bashir has returned from Damascus. He's telling stories in the square about the great cities." Rashid chuckled and waved them off. "Go then, but remember, merchants are second-best storytellers in the world. The best are liars, and it's often hard to tell the difference." In the village center, a crowd had gathered around portly Bashir, whose wealth showed in fine robes and well-fed appearance. His hands gestured dramatically as he spoke. "And the Colosseum, my friends, a building so vast our entire village could fit inside 10 times over. 50,000 people watch the games at once. The very stones shake with their roaring." "What games?" called a young boy. The merchant's eyes glittered. "Gladiators, warriors who fight for glory and freedom, men from every corner of the empire, Gauls tall as trees, Numidians fast as leopards, Germans fierce as winter wolves. A skilled gladiator can win his freedom, become rich and famous throughout the empire." Kaveh listened, transfixed. In his mind's eye, he saw himself in that arena, sword in hand, the crowd chanting his name. He was lost in these dreams when the first scream cut through the night. For a moment everyone froze. Then came another scream, and another, and suddenly darkness beyond the village erupted with light, not gentle cook-fires but hungry, violent flames meant to destroy. "Romans!" someone shouted. "The Romans are here!" Chaos exploded. People ran in every direction, parents grabbing children, elderly scrambling for homes, young men searching desperately for weapons. Kaveh stood paralyzed for a heartbeat. Then instinct took over. "Zara!" he shouted, grabbing his sister's hand. "We have to find mother and father." They ran through streets now choked with smoke and screaming. The Romans, or auxiliary soldiers in Roman service, had come from multiple directions, cutting off escape routes. They moved with terrible efficiency, not like clumsy raiders, but like a machine designed for a single purpose, to capture and control. Kaveh's home came into view, surrounded by soldiers. He saw his father trying to bar the door, saw a spear butt strike him down. Something tore open in Kaveh's chest, and he heard himself screaming as he charged forward. He had no weapon, no training, nothing but desperate fury of a boy watching his family destroyed. He crashed into the nearest soldier, fists pounding uselessly against armor. For a moment, his assault succeeded through sheer surprise. Then pain exploded across the back of his head, and the world tilted. When his vision cleared, he found himself face down in dirt, hands being bound behind his back with rough cord. Zara was screaming nearby. He could hear his mother crying, calling his father's name over and over. "This one's got spirit," a voice said in Latin above him. "Fought like a young lion, stupid but brave." A different voice, older. "They're all brave at 15. Mark him for the quarries. If he survives a year, he might be worth training." Rough hands hauled Kaveh to his feet. Through eyes blurred with tears and blood, he saw his village burning. He saw neighbors being herded like livestock. The young and strong separated from old and weak. He saw Bashir lying motionless in dirt, fine robes trampled and bloodied. His father was being helped up by his mother, blood streaming from a forehead wound. Their eyes met across the chaos, and Kaveh saw his father's heart breaking. "I love you," his father mouthed silently. "Stay alive. Whatever happens, stay alive." Then soldiers moved between them, and Kaveh was shoved into a line of prisoners. Metal closed around his neck, a slave collar marked with a seal, chains threaded through collar rings, connecting prisoners in a single unit of misery. As night wore on and fires died, the Romans organized captives for the march. Kaveh's group, 37 people, mostly young men with a handful of women and older boys, received a single cup of water to share. Just before dawn, as they prepared to move out, Kaveh looked back at his ruined home. The village was devastation now, buildings burned or torn apart. Somewhere in that ruin his family remained, those deemed too old or young to be worth taking. The caravan master, a scarred veteran with dead eyes, walked down the line of chained prisoners. When he reached Kaveh, he paused, noting dried blood in the defiant chin. "You wonder why," the man said in accented Aramaic. "Here is your answer, boy. Rome needs. It needs marble for temples and palaces. It needs bodies to break stone. Your village's crime was existing in the wrong place when Rome needed fresh slaves for the quarries. There is no deeper meaning, no great injustice to rail against, just need and power, and the fact that Rome has power and you do not." As the sun rose, painting the sky in shades that would have been beautiful on any other day, the chain of prisoners began their march. With each step, Kaveh felt his old life falling away, becoming like a dream. He was a slave now, property, a thing to be used until it broke. But deep in his chest, beneath fear and grief and shock, something else burned. A small flame of rage and determination that whispered, "This is not where my story ends. I will survive, I will endure, and someday, somehow, I will be free again." Chapter 2. The Quarries of White Marble. The journey to the quarries took 11 days of suffering, heat and thirst and pain melting into a single endless moment. The chain connecting prisoners allowed no privacy, no dignity, no relief. By the third day, older prisoners had taught younger ones the essential truth of slave marches. Save your energy for walking. Don't waste breath on talking. Don't waste strength on anger. Place one foot in front of the other. Drink when water is offered. Eat when food is given. Everything else is luxury. 3 prisoners died during the march. The Romans simply unlocked their collars, dragged bodies aside, and moved on. On the 11th day, they crested a rise and saw the quarries spread before them. Carved into living rock of a hillside, the quarries looked like wounds in earth, vast stepped terraces descending into ground, each level swarming with tiny figures. Even from a distance, Kaveh could hear metal ringing on stone, rumble of shifting rock, crack of whips, and wordless sound of hundreds of men engaged in brutal labor. "Welcome to your new home," a guard announced with dark humor. "The quarries of Luna, source of the finest white marble in the empire, your backs will break to build eternity." As they descended, the scale became apparent. Each terrace was 10 or 15 feet high, the quarry descending at least 8 levels deep. White marble gleamed in afternoon sun, beautiful and pitiless. Everywhere slaves worked, some wielding massive hammers to split stone, others dragging blocks larger than a man using ropes and raw muscle, still others using copper wedges to extract particular sections. Overseers moved among workers carrying whips and clubs. Guards with spears stood at intervals, not preventing escape but preventing rebellion. The prisoners were herded into a processing area. Their chains were removed, then they were forced to strip, and their bodies inspected like livestock. The strong received chalk marks, white for deep quarry, red for surface work. The weak received black marks and were sent to the breaking ground, where life expectancy was measured in weeks. Kaveh received a white mark. Despite the horror of the march, his young body was still strong. They were given rough tunics and assigned to work crews. Kaveh found himself in a group led by a foreman named Marcus, a man with leather skin and eyes that no longer saw slaves as human. "You work sunrise to sunset," Marcus told them. "Food twice daily, water when we say. You try to escape, we crucify you. You rebel, we kill 1 in 10 as punishment. You steal, we cut off your hand. Questions? Silence. Good. You start tomorrow at first light." The barracks were long, low buildings with dirt floors and no windows, just roof vents for heat and smoke. Rough wooden platforms along both walls served as beds, each slave allotted space barely wider than his shoulders. A single thin blanket per person. No pillows, no privacy. The stench was overwhelming. Kaveh found an empty space near the back, sitting on hard wood, trying to process everything. 12 days ago, he'd been dreaming of glory. Now he was property, branded with a number on his shoulder. 1717, dressed in rags. First time in the quarries? An older man settled beside him, perhaps 40, though slavery aged people strangely. His arms were corded with muscle, but scars crisscrossed his back, and his hands were masses of calluses. "Yes," Kaveh managed. "I'm Darius, Greek originally, been here 6 years. 6 years. The word seemed impossible. "You'll want to know how to survive," Darius continued quietly. "First, your hands will bleed and blister. Piss on them every night. Yes, I'm serious. It hardens skin faster than anything. Second, eat everything they give you, even if it makes you sick. Third, make friends. You'll need people to watch your back." "Why are you helping me?" Darius smiled sadly. "Because I'm Greek, and Greeks believe in hospitality to strangers. Because you're young, and I had a son once, before the Romans took him. Because in this place, we're all we have. We can be human to each other. That's the only way to keep your soul intact." Over the next hour, Darius gave Kaveh a crash course in quarry survival. Where to stand to avoid worst sun, which foremen were merely cruel versus sadistic, how to spot when cut stone would shift, how to hide small injuries, how to steal extra water. 100 small pieces of knowledge meaning the difference between surviving and perishing. "But the most important thing," Darius said as last light faded, "is to find something to live for, some reason to endure. Find your reason and hold on to it. Otherwise you'll give up, and once you give up, you're already dead." That night, lying on hard wood in darkness, listening to coughs and moans around him, Kaveh thought about reasons to live. In the end, he settled on something simple. He would live because dying would mean the raid had succeeded completely. He would live as an act of defiance. It wasn't much of a reason, but it was enough. Chapter 3. Stone, Sun, and Suffering. Kaveh woke to darkness and shuffling feet. A slave moved through the barracks with a horn, blowing a single harsh note. Around him, men groaned and rose, movements stiff and pained. "Move quickly," Darius advised. "Last ones to the food line get scraps." Outside, pre-dawn air was surprisingly cold. Slaves shuffled toward an area where massive pots of gray porridge sat over fires. Kaveh received a wooden bowl, his own, guard it with your life, and a dollop of mixture. It tasted like wet clay with hints of grain, but he ate it all. As sun lightened the eastern sky, slaves were sorted into work crews. Kaveh found himself assigned to 8 men, led by a foreman named Titus, a short, muscular Roman with a flogging whip on his belt. "Your job is simple," Titus told them. "You move blocks from where they're cut to the loading area. Blocks weigh between 300 and 800 pounds. You drag them using ropes in your backs. If you drop a block and it breaks, someone gets 10 lashes. If you move too slowly, 5 lashes. If you complain, 20 lashes. Questions?" Silence. They descended into the quarry, down rough-cut stairs in stone, past level after level of working slaves, until they reached a deeper terrace. Here, skilled cutters used copper saws and wooden wedges to separate massive blocks from living rock. Kaveh's crew's job was moving the cut blocks. The first block looked impossible. A rectangular mass perhaps 4 feet long, 3 feet wide, 2 feet thick. 8 men to move something that must have weighed at least half a ton. "Ropes underneath," someone translated. "We lift on 3, then drag. Keep it steady or it splits." They positioned themselves, threading thick ropes under the block, then wrapping ends around shoulders and backs. The rope bit into Kaveh's shoulder immediately. 1, 2, 3. 8 men heaved. The block shifted, rose, began to move. The rope cut into Kaveh's shoulder like a blade of fire. His feet scrambled for purchase. Sweat streamed into his eyes, though they'd barely begun. They dragged the block 10 feet before Titus called a halt. Already Kaveh's shoulder was raw, his back screaming. They had to move this block 200 feet, then go back and move another, and another, all day, every day. By midday, Kaveh understood why Darius emphasized eating everything. His body was consuming itself. His hands bled where rope rubbed them. His shoulder was a mass of pain. His back felt like hot spikes were being driven into it. And the sun beat down like a physical weight, turning the quarry into an oven. At the midday break, they received water, a single ladle per person, and more gray porridge. Kaveh's hands shook so badly he could barely hold his bowl. "You're doing well," Darius told him quietly. "Better than most on their first day. But pace yourself. This isn't a sprint. It's a marathon that lasts until you die or are freed." "How do you bear it? Day after day, year after year?" Darius looked out over the quarry, hundreds of slaves laboring like insects. "You stop thinking about yesterday or tomorrow. There is only now, only this moment, this stone, this step. If you let yourself think about how long you've been here or might remain, you'll go mad. So you shrink your world down to just what's in front of you. That's the secret." The horn blew. Back to work. The afternoon was worse. The sun reached its peak, and white marble reflected heat back, creating a doubled assault. Men began to stumble. One slave collapsed entirely. The foreman studied him briefly, then called for replacements. The collapsed slave was carried away, and Kaveh never learned what became of him. As evening finally dimmed the sky, Kaveh's crew moved their last block. The 17th, he'd counted. His body had moved beyond pain into a strange, numb state, where he was no longer fully inhabiting it. When the horn finally blew to signal day's end, he nearly collapsed. Only Darius's hand on his elbow kept him upright. "Come on, boy. Dinner, then sleep. Tomorrow will be no easier, but at least you'll know what to expect." That first night, Kava couldn't sleep despite exhaustion. Every position hurt, and in his mind the day kept repeating. The weight, the heat, the endless dragging of stone, the knowledge that tomorrow would be exactly the same, but he'd survived. That was something. He was still alive, still conscious, still himself. The quarry hadn't broken him yet. The days blurred together, 1 week, 2 weeks, a month, each day the same brutal routine. Wake in darkness, choke down thin porridge, descend into the quarry, drag stone until your body screamed, receive water and food just sufficient to keep you alive, drag more stone, collapse in barracks, sleep, repeat. Kava's body adapted in ways he wouldn't have thought possible. His hands developed calluses thick as leather. His shoulders built up scar tissue serving as natural padding. His muscles developed wiry strength. His lungs learned to filter marble dust. But the quarries took their toll. A young Numidian named Hanno developed an infection and was sent to the breaking ground, never seen again. An older Gaul named Brennus tried to steal extra food and received 10 lashes. Something broke in him that day. He worked mechanically after, never speaking, his eyes empty. Yet life persisted. Friendships formed. Darius became almost a father figure, teaching Kava how to maintain sanity. They would talk evenings about philosophy, old stories, anything except the quarry. These conversations became a lifeline. A young Greek named Nikos, barely older than Kava, became a close friend. Nikos had a gift for finding small joys even in hell. A perfectly shaped stone, a moment of cool breeze, a guard's comical stumble. He taught Kave that laughter was a form of resistance. An Ethiopian slave named Zala, massive and quiet, took to protecting younger slaves from bullying. Where Romans created conditions for suffering, slaves themselves sometimes magnified it, taking frustrations out on those weaker. Zala would simply position himself near the vulnerable and stare down aggressors. 3 months in, Kave realized he'd stopped thinking about his old life every waking moment. The memories were still there, still painful, but they'd become something he visited rather than something constantly tormenting him. He was adapting, becoming a creature of this place. Then, on a day like any other, everything changed. Chapter 4. The Hidden Path. Titus called Kave out of the crew. "You, number 17, there's been a collapse in the deep section. We need bodies to clear rubble. You're young and small. You can fit in gaps. Go." Kave's heart sank. Collapse sites were among the most dangerous assignments. Unstable stone, bad air, risk of further collapse. Slaves sent to clear rubble had a mortality rate 3 times higher than regular laborers. But orders were orders. Refusal meant flogging or worse. He followed a different foreman down to the lowest quarry level, then into a side tunnel he'd never noticed. The air grew close and stale. Marble walls pressed in from all sides. They reached the collapse site, a section where perhaps 20 feet of tunnel ceiling had given way, creating a chaotic pile of broken marble ranging from fist-sized chunks to blocks as large as a man. 3 other slaves were already working, hauling smaller pieces back. "Start clearing," the foreman commanded. "Careful you don't destabilize anything or bring more down on your heads." He left, confident that fear of death would keep them working. The Kave studied the collapse, trying to determine where to begin. The other slaves worked mechanically, not speaking, each lost in their own world of fear and fatigue. He began at the edges, moving smaller stones first, gradually working toward larger obstacles. Hours passed. The air grew worse, hot and dusty and thin. His water was gone. His hands began to bleed again from sharp edges of broken marble, but slowly, methodically, the pile diminished. He was deep in the work, in that half-conscious state where thought ceased and only action remained, when he moved a particular stone and felt something strange. Air, moving air, cool and fresh, flowing from a gap he'd just uncovered. Curious, he cleared more stones away, expanding the gap. The other slaves were too exhausted to notice. The foreman hadn't returned. The gap expanded to a crack, the crack to a hole large enough to put his arm through. The cool air kept flowing, carrying strange scents, not dust and stone of the quarry, but something else, something organic, almost like spices? Kaveh glanced around. The other slaves were working at the far end. The foreman was gone. He had a decision to make. He could report this gap, let authority investigate, continue working as ordered, the safe choice, the slave's choice. Or he could look for himself, see where this air was coming from, perhaps find nothing, perhaps find trouble, but something in his chest, that small flame that had sustained him through chains and stone and endless suffering, whispered that this was important, that this moment, this choice, mattered. So Kaveh began to widen the hole. The other slaves were focused on their own work, their own survival. He worked carefully, silently, removing stones one by one, making the opening larger. It took another hour, his muscles screaming, his hands slick with blood and dust. But finally the hole was large enough for a thin 15-year-old to squeeze through. He looked back one more time, still no foreman. The other slaves hadn't noticed or didn't care. They were too broken by exhaustion to be curious about anything beyond their immediate task. Kaveh pushed his water skin through the hole first, then his body. The stone scraped his sides, caught on his rough tunic, but he pushed harder, wriggled, twisted, and then he was through. He found himself in a narrow passage, natural rather than quarried, that wound away into darkness. But ahead, perhaps 30 feet away, he could see a faint glow. Not the harsh light of day, but something softer, like light filtering through cracks from above. His heart pounding, from exertion, from fear, from something that might have been hope or might have been madness. Kaveh moved forward, one hand on the rough stone wall to guide him in the dim light. The passage widened, the glow grew stronger, and then he stepped into a space that made his breath catch. Chapter 5. The Cave of Ancient Secrets. It was a cave, natural and hidden, roughly circular and perhaps 20 feet across. Light filtered down through multiple cracks in the stone ceiling far above, creating shafts of illumination that gave the space an almost sacred quality. The air was cool and dry, and the strange scent he'd noticed earlier was much stronger here. Definitely spices, but unlike any combination he'd smelled before. But what stopped Kaveh's breath was what the light revealed. Against one wall stood an ancient chest, its wood dark with age, bound with bronze that had turned green with time. Around it, carved into the stone walls themselves, were symbols, not Roman letters or Greek script or even the Aramaic characters he could barely read, but something far older, symbols that looked like they'd been carved by hands that predated empire and memory. The floor was surprisingly clean, as if this place had been sealed away from the dust and degradation of the world above. In one corner, he saw what looked like the remains of a small altar, a flat stone with a shallow depression in its center, and around it, the brittle fragments of what might once have been offerings. Kaveh approached the chest slowly, half expecting it to vanish like a desert mirage, but it remained solid, real. He ran his fingers over the ancient bronze bindings, feeling the patina of centuries beneath his touch. The chest wasn't locked. Perhaps locks hadn't been needed if this place was as hidden as it seemed. Or perhaps the lock had rusted away long ago. With trembling hands, from exhaustion, from fear, from something else entirely, Kava lifted the heavy lid. Inside, packed carefully in what looked like silk that had mostly rotted away, were clay vessels, perhaps a dozen of them, each no larger than his palm, sealed with wax that had hardened to the consistency of stone, and beneath them, wrapped in what might once have been oiled leather, was a scroll. Kavi lifted one of the vessels carefully. It was surprisingly light. When he shook it gently, he heard the dry whisper of powder inside. The wax seal bore a mark, the same symbol that was carved most prominently on the wall above the chest, a circle with 8 points radiating from it, like a sun or a star. Setting the vessel down, he carefully lifted the scroll. The leather wrapping cracked and fell away at his touch, but the scroll itself seemed intact. Unrolling it with infinite care, Kavi found himself looking at text and diagrams unlike anything he'd ever seen. The script was definitely ancient, perhaps Phoenician, he thought, remembering fragments of stories his grandmother had told about the old trading people who'd once sailed the entire Mediterranean. But mixed with the text were drawings, plants he didn't recognize, geometric patterns, and what looked like instructions for something. Mixing, preparation. One diagram showed a vessel like those in the chest. Lines connected it to drawings of various plants and powders. Other lines led to a human figure with marks on the head, the chest, and the limbs, as if indicating areas of effect. This was a recipe, a formula. For what, he couldn't be certain, but the care with which it had been preserved, the secrecy of its hiding place, suggested something valuable, something powerful. Kava's hands shook as he carefully set the scroll down and examined the clay vessels more closely. Each was marked with a different symbol. Together, they seemed to correspond to the diagrams on the scroll. Different ingredients, perhaps, each needing to be mixed in specific proportions. His mind raced. What was this place? Who had carved these symbols, hidden this chest? And why here, in the depths beneath what would one day become a Roman quarry? Perhaps this had been a shrine once, before the Romans came, a sacred place where priests or healers had kept their most precious knowledge. And when conquest came, whether Roman or someone before them, someone had sealed this cave away, hiding their secrets from the conquerors. How long had it sat here? Decades, centuries. And now, by pure chance, a collapse in the quarry had opened a path that allowed Kaveh to stumble into this forgotten sanctuary. He looked at the vessels, at the scroll, at the ancient symbols on the walls. A part of his mind, the cautious part that had learned survival in the quarries, screamed at him to leave this place alone. These were things beyond his understanding, beyond his knowledge. They could be dangerous. They could be cursed. They could bring nothing but trouble. But another part, the part that had once dreamed of heroes and glory, the part that still burned with that small flame of defiance, whispered something different. This was a gift, a chance, perhaps the only chance he would ever get. He thought of Darius's words, find something to live for, some reason to endure. What if this wasn't just about enduring? What if this was about transforming, about becoming something more than a slave dragging stones until his body broke? The scroll seemed to promise that. The care with which these vessels had been preserved suggested they contained something valuable, something powerful. The symbols on the walls, particularly the one showing the human figure marked with points of energy, suggested enhancement, improvement, transformation. It could be nothing. It could be poison. It could be the desperate hope of a half-mad slave looking for any escape from his reality. But Kava had nothing to lose. He was already dead in every way that mattered. His old life burned, his freedom taken, his future a slow grinding into dust in the quarries. What was the worst that could happen? That he'd die? He was dying anyway, just slowly. But if this was real, if these ancient secrets held even a fraction of what the scroll seemed to promise, then maybe, just maybe, he could become something more. Something strong enough to survive. Something powerful enough to seize his own fate. Decision crystallized in his chest, like ice forming on water. He would take this chance. He would use these secrets, and he would transform himself from victim into weapon. Carefully, reverently, Kava began to study the scroll more closely, trying to decipher the ancient instructions. The light filtering from above was fading. Evening must be approaching outside. He needed to return before his absence was noticed and explained. But he would come back. This cave had waited centuries for someone to find it. It could wait a few more hours. He memorized what he could of the scroll, particularly the diagram showing the mixing process. 3 vessels combined in specific proportions, mixed with water, consumed at night on an empty stomach. The effects, if he was reading the symbols correctly, would begin within days. Strength, speed, clarity of mind. The 3 gifts promised by the ancient formula. Or poison, or madness, or nothing at all. Only one way to find out. Kaveh carefully selected 3 vessels, choosing based on the symbols that corresponded to the first formula in the scroll. He wrapped them in a strip torn from his tunic and tucked them carefully inside his clothing. They were small enough that if he was careful, they wouldn't be noticed. He took one last look around the cave, at the ancient symbols glowing softly in the fading light, at the chest with its remaining secrets, at this place outside of time and empire. "Thank you," he whispered to whoever had left this gift. "Whether gods or forgotten priests or ancient healers, I will honor what you've given me. I will not waste it." Then he turned and squeezed back through the narrow passage, emerging into the collapsed tunnel where the other slaves were still working mechanically, too exhausted to have noticed or cared about his absence. He joined them, clearing rubble as if he'd been there all along. When the foreman finally returned to inspect their progress, he found 4 exhausted slaves who had made good progress on clearing the collapse. "Acceptable," the man grunted. "Tomorrow you finish this, then back to your regular cruise." That night, back in the barracks, Kavi lay on his wooden platform and felt the weight of the clay vessels hidden in his tunic. Around him, slaves coughed and moaned and whispered prayers in a dozen different languages. Tomorrow night, he would mix the first dose. He would drink it, and he would discover whether he'd found salvation or damnation in the hidden cave. But either way, his fate would be his own choice. For the first time since the night his village burned, he would act rather than merely endure. He would shape his destiny rather than submit to it. That small flame in his chest burned brighter. The story was just beginning. Chapter 6. The Elixir of Transformation. That night, Kavi waited until the barracks fell into its usual rhythm of exhausted sleep, the coughs and snores and restless shifting of men too tired to dream peacefully. He waited until the moon rose high enough to send a sliver of light through the roof vents, just enough to see by. Then, moving with infinite care, he extracted the 3 clay vessels from their hiding place beneath his thin blanket. His heart pounded so hard he was certain it would wake someone. But the slaves around him were too far gone into exhaustion to notice anything short of a fire or a guard's horn. Kava had spent the evening memorizing what he'd seen on the scroll. The proportions were critical, The ancient diagram had made that clear. 3 parts from the first vessel, marked with the symbol like a lightning bolt. 2 parts from the second, marked with a spiral. 1 part from the third, marked with an eye. He had no proper measuring tools, so he had to estimate. Using his wooden eating bowl as a mixing vessel, he carefully broke the wax seal on the first clay jar. Inside was a reddish-brown powder that smelled sharp and almost metallic, with undertones of something earthy and ancient. 3 pinches. He measured them carefully, trying to make each pinch as equal as possible. The second vessel held a golden powder that smelled of honey and sunlight and something else he couldn't identify, something that made his nose tingle and his eyes water slightly. 2 pinches. The third vessel contained something different, not a powder, but tiny crystalline fragments, almost like salt but with a faint purple sheen. They smelled of nothing at all, which somehow seemed more ominous than the pungent others. 1 pinch. He stared down at the mixture in his bowl, a combination of colors and textures that should have looked random but somehow seemed to form a pattern. The different elements finding arrangement as if drawn together by invisible forces. Now came the moment of truth. The scroll had shown water being added, pure water, if he'd understood correctly, though all the water in the quarries tasted of stone and metal. He poured water from his daily ration skin, just enough to cover the powders. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the mixture began to dissolve, the powders seeming to melt into the water, creating swirls of color, red and gold and purple mixing but not quite blending, creating patterns that shifted and changed like clouds. After a few minutes, the liquid settled into a uniform color, a deep amber that seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight, though that might have been his imagination. Kava lifted the bowl to his nose and inhaled. The smell was complex, bitter and sweet, sharp and mellow, familiar and alien all at once. It didn't smell poisonous, but then again, he had no idea what poison smelled like. This was the moment, the choice: drink or pour it out and return to being nothing more than a slave destined to break stone until his body gave out. He thought of his father's last words: stay alive. Whatever happens, stay alive. But what was the point of staying alive if life was nothing but suffering? What was survival without hope, without the possibility of becoming something more? Kava brought the bowl to his lips and drank. The liquid was thick, coating his mouth and throat. The taste was indescribable, at once bitter as bile and sweet as honey, burning like fire and cooling like ice. It seemed to be multiple tastes at once, shifting and changing even as he swallowed. He drank it all, every drop, then set the bowl down carefully and waited. At first, nothing. He sat there in the darkness, listening to his own heartbeat, wondering if he'd just consumed an ancient poison and would be dead by morning. Perhaps that would be a mercy. Perhaps. Then it began. Heat, starting in his stomach, then spreading, up into his chest, down into his limbs, up into his head. Not painful exactly, but intense, like being warmed by a fire from the inside. His skin began to tingle, then to burn, not with pain but with sensation, as if every nerve in his body was suddenly awakening from a long sleep. He could feel the rough wood beneath him with startling clarity, could feel the movement of air from the vents above, could feel his own heartbeat pulsing in his fingertips. His muscles began to twitch and spasm, not violently, but rhythmically, as if they were being exercised by some invisible force. He could feel them tightening, relaxing, tightening again, over and over. His head swam. For a moment he thought he might vomit, but the sensation passed, replaced by a strange clarity. His thoughts, usually muddled by exhaustion and hunger, suddenly became sharp and focused. He could remember things with perfect detail, The exact layout of the hidden cave, every symbol on the ancient scroll, the face of everyone in his work crew, the pattern of stones in the quarry wall, the sensations intensified. His body felt like it was being taken apart and reassembled at a fundamental level. He could feel his bones, actually feel them, as if he had new awareness of his own skeleton. He could feel his blood moving through his veins, his lungs expanding and contracting, his heart beating its steady rhythm. Time lost meaning. He might have sat there for minutes or hours. The sensations would peak, then ebb, then peak again, like waves crashing on a shore. Finally, gradually, the intensity began to fade. The burning cooled, the tingling subsided. His muscles stopped their rhythmic contractions. His thoughts, while still clear, lost that crystalline sharpness that had bordered on overwhelming. Kaveh lay back on the wooden platform, exhausted but also strangely energized. His body felt different, not dramatically so, not obviously, but there was a quality to it that hadn't been there before, a sense of potential, of power held in reserve. Sleep took him, and he fell into dreams unlike any he'd had before. Vivid, intense dreams of running faster than the wind, of lifting stones that should have been immovable, of fighting with speed and precision that seemed superhuman. He woke to the horn signaling the start of another day, and for a moment feared he'd imagined everything. But no, his bowl still smelled faintly of the mixture. The clay vessels were still hidden in his tunic. And his body felt good. Not just not in pain good, but actually good. The constant ache in his shoulders was gone. His hands, which always hurt despite their calluses, felt strong and flexible. His back, which usually took the first hour of each day to unlock from its stiffness, felt loose and ready. "You look better," Darius observed as they lined up for morning porridge. "Almost like you slept well for once." Kaveh smiled. "Maybe I'm finally adjusting to this place." Or maybe you're just young. Youth can endure what age cannot." They received their rations and ate quickly. Then came the descent into the quarries, the assignment to cruise, the beginning of another day of brutal labor. Kaveh took his position on the rope for the first block. They lifted on 3, and it felt different. The weight was still immense, still required all his strength, but it felt manageable, more than manageable. He found he had strength in reserve, power he hadn't needed to tap into fully. "Good pull, 17, Titus the foreman noted. "Keep that energy up." As the morning progressed, Kaveh realized the change was real. The work that had left him exhausted by midday now left him merely tired. His hands gripped the rope without cramping. His shoulders took the weight without the sharp pains he'd learned to endure. His legs, which usually trembled by the afternoon, remained steady. And his mind was sharper. He could anticipate when the man in front of him would stumble, could adjust his own footing accordingly. He could see the best path to drag each block, saving steps and effort. He could remember exactly how many blocks they'd moved and how many remained, keeping count without conscious effort. "You're strong today," said Nikos during the midday break, eyeing Kaveh with curious approval. "What changed?" Kaveh shrugged, trying to appear casual. "Maybe I finally got used to the work. 3 months it takes most men a year to get where you are today. If you keep improving like this, the foreman will notice. Could mean better assignments. Or," he paused, "could mean harder work. They push the strong ones hardest." It was a warning Kaveh took to heart. He couldn't let the change be too obvious, too dramatic. He needed to be careful, to meter his improvements, to make them seem like natural adaptation rather than sudden transformation. But as the afternoon progressed and the sun beat down and the stones needed moving, It was hard to hold back. His body wanted to work, wanted to move, wanted to use this newfound strength and energy. He had to consciously slow himself, force himself to struggle when struggling was no longer necessary. By evening, when the horn finally blew, Kava realized something crucial. He wasn't exhausted. Tired, yes. Ready for rest, certainly, but not the bone-deep, soul-crushing exhaustion that had characterized every evening for the past 3 months. He felt like he could have kept working, like he had reserves of strength untapped. The ancient formula was real. The transformation had begun. Over the following days, the changes became more pronounced. Kaveh continued to take the mixture each night, adjusting the proportions slightly as he learned how his body responded, making the doses smaller to avoid the overwhelming intensity of that first night. His strength increased noticeably. Blocks that had required his full effort now moved with relative ease. His calloused hands could grip tighter, hold longer. His shoulders could bear greater weight. His speed improved. He could dodge falling debris that would have struck him before. His hands could tie knots and secure ropes faster than anyone else in his crew. When descending the quarry stairs, his feet found purchase with unconscious precision. But perhaps most valuable was the sharpness of his mind. He learned Latin with startling speed, picking up words and grammar that had eluded him for months. He could remember conversations verbatim, could recall the exact location of every tool and rope in their section of the quarry. He began to understand the rhythms of the guards' patrols, the patterns of the foreman's inspections, the hidden structure underlying the apparent chaos of the quarries, and he was careful, so careful, to hide these improvements. He made sure to appear tired at day's end. He occasionally dropped things or stumbled, maintaining the appearance of normal human fallibility. He never moved faster than necessary, never lifted more than his share, never gave any indication that he was becoming something other than an ordinary slave. But others began to notice anyway. "You've changed," Dario said one evening, studying Kaveh with his sharp Greek eyes. "I can't quite say how, but you're different than you were even a month ago. Stronger, more present, like you found that reason to live we talked about." "Maybe I have," Kaveh said carefully. "Maybe I've just decided that surviving isn't enough. I want to live." Dario smiled. "Good. That fire in you, don't let it die. This place tries to kill more than bodies. It tries to kill spirits. But you're fighting back. I can see it." Not everyone's attention was so benign. Marcus, one of the crueler foremen, began watching Kaveh more closely. His eyes would narrow when Kaveh moved a particularly heavy load, when he worked through the afternoon without visible flagging. "You've been eating extra rations, boy?" Marcus demanded one day, grabbing Kaveh by the collar. "Stealing food? How else you getting so strong?" "No, master," Kaveh said quickly, keeping his eyes down in proper slave deference. "I eat only what's given. I'm just young. Young bodies adapt." Marcus studied him a long moment, then shoved him away. "Young," he says. "We'll see how young you feel after another year or two. This place eats youth like bread." But the incident worried Kaveh. He needed to be more careful. The last thing he wanted was intense scrutiny from the authorities. The answer came from an unexpected source. Chapter 7, The Overseer's Wrath. It was Zala, the massive Ethiopian slave, who inadvertently provided Kaveh with the opportunity he needed, though it came wrapped in violence and danger. The incident began in the evening after the work horn had blown and the slaves were shuffling back toward the barracks. A young boy, couldn't have been more than 12, newly arrived from some distant raid, stumbled and fell on the quarry stairs. He was crying, exhausted beyond his body's ability to endure. One of the overseers, a man called Brutus, who was notorious for his cruelty, saw the fallen child and his face twisted with rage. "Get up, you worthless whelp!" Brutus roared, his vinewood staff already rising. The boy tried to rise but collapsed again, his legs simply giving out. He wasn't defiant or lazy. He was broken, pushed past what his young body could endure. Brutus's staff came down hard across the boy's back, then again and again. "I said get up!" the boy screamed. Slaves nearby stopped, then quickly looked away. Everyone knew that intervening in a beating meant sharing the punishment. The iron rule of the quarries: mind your own survival, because no one else will. But Zala didn't look away. The massive Ethiopian strode forward, his face set in lines of grim determination. "Enough," he said in his accented Latin. "The boy cannot rise. Beating him won't change that." Brutus spun, his face purple with rage at being challenged. "You dare speak to me, slave? You dare question how I discipline?" "He's a child," Zala interrupted, his deep voice carrying across the quarry. "And you're not disciplining. You're murdering." "There's a difference." For a moment, everyone froze. Slaves didn't talk back to overseers. They certainly didn't accuse them of murder, even when it was true. The punishment for such defiance could be crucifixion, being thrown to wild beasts, or any number of agonizing deaths the Romans had perfected over centuries. Brutus's face went from purple to almost white with rage. "You've just earned yourself 50 lashes, Ethiopian, and when that's done, we'll see if—" "No," Zala said simply. "No more beatings today." He stood there, 6.5 feet of solid muscle, arms crossed, utterly immovable, and something in his stance, in his eyes, conveyed a message. "If you want to beat that boy again, you'll have to go through me first, and I'm done being afraid of death." Brutus understood the message. His hand moved to the gladius at his belt, not the vinewood staff used for discipline, but actual killing steel. Guards began moving closer, hands on spear shafts. This was about to become a bloodbath. Kaveh watched from perhaps 20 feet away, his mind racing with the clarity the ancient formula had given him. Zala was about to die. The boy would probably die anyway, and the Romans would make an example of both that would cow the slaves for months, unless something changed the equation. Kaveh had been careful for weeks, hiding his improvements, playing the role of normal slave. But what was the point of power if you never used it? What was the point of becoming strong if you remained just another coward, too afraid to act? The small flame in his chest, the one that had kept him alive and sane and human, suddenly roared into an inferno. He stepped forward. "Master Brutus," he called out, his voice carrying clearly across the quarry. Every eye turned to him. Perhaps a trade? Brutus turned, confused and even more enraged at this second interruption. "What?" The Ethiopian spoke out of turn. "That deserves punishment, as you said. 50 lashes. Kaveh walked closer, keeping his posture respectful but his eyes steady. "But the boy is too injured to work tomorrow. You've made your point with him. So, perhaps, the Ethiopian's punishment. But the boy goes to the physician? That way you maintain discipline without losing 2 workers." It was a gamble. Brutus could simply order both Kaveh and Zala beaten or killed. But Kaveh was betting on something he'd observed about the overseers. They cared about efficiency. Slaves were expensive. Losing them to injury or death represented losses, and overseers who lost too many slaves faced consequences from their own superiors. Brutus stared at Kaveh, his mind clearly working through the implications. Finally he smiled. Not a pleasant smile, but the smile of a man who'd found a new toy to break. "You're clever, 17. Too clever for your own good. Fine. The Ethiopian gets his 50 lashes for insubordination. The boy goes to the physician. He stepped closer to Kava, his wine-sour breath washing over the young man's face. But you get 20 lashes for presuming to negotiate with your betters. Seems fair? 20 lashes. Kava had watched other slaves receive similar punishments. It was agonizing, but survivable. If you were strong enough, if you had reserves of strength to draw on, if you had the gifts of an ancient formula running through your blood. Yes, master, Kava said quietly. Fair. Good. All 3 punishments, tomorrow morning before work, so everyone can watch and learn. Brutus raised his voice, addressing all the slaves. This is what happens when you forget your place. The Ethiopian learns not to challenge authority. The boy learns that weakness is not tolerated, and this clever one learns that slaves don't make deals. Guards hauled Zala away to a holding cell. He'd spend the night in chains to ensure he couldn't escape his punishment. The boy was carried to the physician's quarters, weeping in pain but alive, and Kava was allowed to return to the barracks, though guards watched him carefully in case he tried to flee. As if there was anywhere to flee to. In the barracks, reactions were mixed. Some slaves looked at Kaveh with awe. He'd stood up to an overseer and survived, at least so far. Others looked at him with pity. 20 lashes would break him, maybe kill him, and for what? To save a boy he didn't even know? Darius sat beside him, his face grave. That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen. Probably both, Kaveh admitted. His hands were shaking now that the moment had passed, reaction setting in. 20 lashes is serious, boy. I've seen strong men never recover, and you're not even fully grown yet. I know, but I couldn't just watch. Zala was going to die. The boy might have died. I had to do something. Did you? Darius asked softly. Did you really? In this place, the first rule is survival. Your survival. You can't save everyone. Maybe not, Kaveh said, but I can try to save someone. Otherwise, what's the point? We might as well be dead already if we stop being human. Darius was quiet for a long moment. Then he put a hand on Kaveh's shoulder. You remind me of my son. He had that same fire, that same inability to look away from injustice. His voice grew thick. It got him killed. The Romans crucified him for trying to help another slave escape. I watched him die over 3 days, and I couldn't do anything to help him. I'm sorry, Kaveh whispered. Don't be sorry. Just be smart. That fire is good. It keeps you human, like you said. But it also makes you a target. After tomorrow, after they beat you in front of everyone, you need to be careful. The Romans don't like slaves who inspire others. They don't like slaves who remind other slaves that courage still exists. Kaveh nodded. But privately he thought, maybe that's exactly what's needed. Maybe that's exactly why the ancient formula found its way to me. Not just to help me survive, but to help me remind others that we're more than beasts of burden, that we're still human. That night, he took another dose of the mixture, a larger dose than usual. He would need every advantage tomorrow. The lash was designed to break bodies and spirits. He'd seen men reduced to whimpering shells after similar punishments. But he had advantages those men didn't. Strength enhanced by ancient secrets, a body that healed faster than normal, and a will that had been forged in chains and flame and stone, and would not easily break. As he lay waiting for sleep, he heard whispers in the darkness, slaves talking about what had happened, about what would happen tomorrow. Some of the whispers were prayers, some were bets on whether he'd survive, some were expressions of hope that maybe, just maybe, someone could stand up to the Romans and not be completely destroyed. Kaveh closed his eyes and thought of his father's words, "Stay alive. Whatever happens, stay alive. He intended to, but not just to survive, to prove something, to show that slaves could still choose courage over fear, to demonstrate that some part of them remained free, even if their bodies were in chains. Tomorrow would hurt. Tomorrow would test him like nothing else had. But tomorrow would also be a turning point, the moment when Kaveh the slave began his transformation into something else, something the Romans would learn to fear. Chapter 8. Blood and Defiance. Dawn came too quickly. Kaveh woke to find his muscles tight, his body instinctively preparing for the trauma to come. Around him, other slaves rose silently, their faces carefully neutral. In the quarries, you learned not to show sympathy for those about to be punished. Sympathy suggested you thought the punishment unjust, and that could get you added to the victims' list. But Darius squeezed his shoulder briefly as they filed out. Nikos gave him a small nod. Even hardened slaves who'd learned to show no emotion had a glimmer of something in their eyes. Respect, maybe, or hope, or just acknowledgement that what he'd done mattered. The punishment was to be carried out in the central area of the quarries, where all the slaves could be assembled to watch. The Romans understood the power of public spectacle. Punishments were as much about intimidating the observers as harming the victim. By the time the sun had fully risen, several hundred slaves had been gathered, arranged in a rough semicircle. In the center stood a wooden post driven deep into the ground, the flogging post, worn smooth by the hands of countless victims. Guards brought out Zala first. The massive Ethiopian's face was calm, almost serene, as they chained his wrists above his head to iron rings set high on the post. His back, already crisscrossed with scars from previous punishments, would soon carry 50 new wounds. Then they brought out Kaveh. As they secured his wrists to lower rings on the post, forcing him to lean forward with his back exposed, he caught Zala's eye. The big man gave him the slightest nod, acknowledgement, gratitude, solidarity. Brutus stood before the assembled slaves, his voice carrying across the quarry. "Behold the price of defiance," the Ethiopian questioned authority. 50 lashes. The boy failed in his duties, punishment delayed for medical necessity but not forgotten. And this one, he pointed at Kaveh, this one presumed to negotiate as if a slave has any voice in Roman justice. 20 lashes. He turned to the man who would administer the punishment, a professional flogger, a slave himself, but one who'd learned that survival sometimes meant becoming the instrument of others' suffering. The man held a flagrum, the Roman flogging whip, multiple leather cords tipped with small pieces of bone and metal, designed to tear flesh with every stroke. "Begin," Brutus commanded. The flogger positioned himself behind Zala first. There was a moment of silence. Then the whistle of leather through air, the crack of impact, and Zala's grunt, the only sound he'd allow himself to make. Kaveh watched as the Ethiopian endured. 1 lash, 5, 10. The man's back became a mass of blood and torn flesh, but he remained standing, his hands gripping the chains, his body absorbing punishment that would have left lesser men unconscious. 20 lashes, 30, 40. Still, Zala stood, though his legs began to tremble. The flogger wasn't being merciful. Each stroke was delivered with full force. This was meant to be an example. Finally, 50. The flogger stepped back, breathing hard from the exertion. Zala hung from his chains, conscious but barely, his back a ruin of meat and blood. Guards unshackled him and dragged him away. He'd be given minimal treatment, enough to prevent death from infection, but nothing like actual medical care. Whether he'd ever work again was uncertain. Whether he'd survive was even less certain. Now it was Kaveh's turn. The flogger moved behind him. Kaveh forced himself to breathe steadily, to relax his muscles as much as possible. Tension would make the damage worse. He thought of the ancient formula flowing through his blood, of the strength it had given him, of the accelerated healing he'd noticed over the past weeks. He would need all of it now. 20 lashes, Brutus announced. Count them aloud, slave. If you lose count, we start over. The first stroke came without warning. Pain exploded across Kaveh's back, not the dull ache of overworked muscles or the sharp sting of scraped skin, but agony that seemed to light every nerve on fire. The metal tips of the flagrum tore through his thin tunic and into flesh, leaving parallel lines of torn skin. 1! Kaveh gasped out, his voice barely audible. The second stroke crossed the first, creating a grid of agony. 2! He'd watched men break at this point, screaming, begging, losing control of their bodies. He'd watched men faint, only to be revived with buckets of salt water, and the count started over. He'd watched men lose their minds, their spirits shattered along with their flesh. But Kaveh had something they didn't. As the third stroke fell, he felt something strange. Beneath the pain, beneath the tearing of flesh and the flow of blood, he felt his body responding, not just enduring, but actively fighting back. His muscles, enhanced by ancient secrets, absorbed some of the impact. His skin, though torn, didn't shred as deeply as it should have, and his mind, sharp and clear despite the agony, remained focused. 3, 4, 5. The pain was incredible, overwhelming, threatening to drown him in waves of red agony. But he rode those waves, stayed above them, refused to let them pull him under. 6, 7. He could hear Brutus's voice, angry now. Harder! The boy barely feels it. That wasn't true. Kaveh felt every stroke like fire and lightning. But he wasn't breaking, wasn't screaming, wasn't giving them the satisfaction of seeing him destroyed. 8, 9, 10. Halfway, his back was a mass of torn flesh and flowing blood, but he remained standing, his voice steady as he counted. The assembled slaves were no longer passive observers. Kaveh could feel their attention, their focus, their dawning realization that they were witnessing something unusual. A boy, barely 16 now, taking 20 lashes without breaking, without begging, without surrendering his dignity. 11, 12. Brutus's voice cut through the sound of leather on flesh. Add 10 more. Make it 30. But another voice, older, with the weight of real authority, stopped him. The sentence was 20. Don't exceed your mandate, Brutus. Kaveh couldn't see who'd spoken, but he recognized the voice of Gaius Marcellus, the quarry's chief administrator, a Roman of the old school who believed in order and discipline but also in rules being followed. Brutus snarled but didn't argue with his superior. Continue the count. 13, 14, 15. The pain had transcended normal sensation. Kaveh existed now in a place beyond pain, where his body screamed but his will remained unbreached. He thought of his village burning. He thought of his family's faces. He thought of the hidden cave and the ancient secrets. He thought of all the slaves watching and what his endurance might mean to them. 16, 17. His number, 17. The brand on his shoulder, the identity the Romans had given him to replace his name. He would endure 17 lashes and 3 more. 18, 19. Almost done, almost through. His back was a ruin, blood running down his legs to pool at his feet, but he was still standing, still conscious, still human. 20. The final stroke fell. The flogger stepped back. Silence filled the quarry, not the silence of fear, but the silence of awe. Kaveh hung from his chains for a moment, gathering strength. Then, to the amazement of everyone watching, he pushed himself upright, not hanging limp like Zala, but standing on his own feet, his legs steady despite the trauma his body had endured. When guards came to unshackle him, he walked away from the post. Stumbled, yes. Shook with pain and blood loss, certainly. But walked, under his own power, refusing to be dragged like a broken thing. The slaves parted before him, their faces showing emotions they usually kept buried: wonder, inspiration, and something that might have been the beginning of hope. As Kava passed Brutus, the overseer's face was purple with rage. "You think you've won something, boy? You think enduring a beating makes you special?" Kava met his eyes, a dangerous thing for a slave to do, and spoke quietly but clearly. "No, master. I just wanted to show that we're harder to break than you think." Then he continued walking, leaving Brutus speechless behind him. They took him to the medical area, a generous term for a shed with a few supplies and a slave who'd once trained as a physician before being captured. The physician, an older Greek named Heracles, examined Kava's back and whistled low. "You should be unconscious. You should be in shock. How are you even standing?" "I don't know," Kava lied. "Just lucky, I guess." "Luck?" Heracles shook his head. "I've treated hundreds of flogging victims. This is not luck. This is—" He paused, searching for words. "Your wounds, they're already clotting. The bleeding has almost stopped. And the tissue damage, it's not as deep as it should be. 20 strokes from a professional flogger should have torn you to the bone in places." He began cleaning the wounds with water and wine, working with surprising gentleness. "Whatever you are, boy, you're unusual. Be careful. The Romans don't like unusual slaves. Unusual slaves are dangerous slaves." "I'll be careful," Kava promised. As Heracles worked, other slaves brought to the medical shed, those with minor injuries or illnesses, stared at Kava with undisguised awe. Word was already spreading through the quarries. The boy who'd defied Brutus, who'd taken 20 lashes and walked away, who'd shown that courage still existed among the enslaved. Darius appeared, having somehow gotten permission to leave his work crew. He stood in the doorway of the medical shed, looking at Kava's bandaged back, and his eyes were wet with tears. "You damned fool," he said softly. "You brave, damned fool. Do you know what you've done?" "Probably made everything harder for myself," Kava admitted. "No, well, yes, that too. But you've also given them something they haven't had in years." Darius gestured vaguely toward the quarries beyond the shed. "Hope. You've reminded them that we're not just animals to be broken, that resistance is still possible, that courage hasn't died. I just didn't want to watch Zala die for being decent. It's never just anything with you, is it?" Darius smiled through his tears. "You're going to change things here. I don't know how, and I'm terrified of what it might cost, but you're going to change things." Heracles finished bandaging Kava's back and gave him a cup of something bitter. "For the pain and for infection, rest here today. Tomorrow," he shrugged. "Tomorrow they'll probably send you back to work. Rome doesn't coddle its slaves." As Kava lay on a rough pallet, sipping the bitter medicine, he thought about what Darius had said. Hope. He'd given them hope. But hope was a dangerous thing for slaves. Hope could lead to rebellion, and rebellion would lead to mass executions. He'd have to be careful. He'd have to show strength without inciting uprising. He'd have to inspire without leading them to destruction. But for now, he'd shown them something important, that they could be broken, but they didn't have to break, that they could endure, that some part of them remained free no matter what the Romans did to their bodies. It was a start. Chapter 9. The Merchant's Eyes. Duplicate. Kava spent 3 days in the medical shed before being returned to his work crew. 3 days during which his back healed with startling speed. By the second day, new flesh was already forming where there should have been raw wounds. By the third day, the worst of the damage had scarred over, leaving him tender but functional. Heracles watched this healing with barely concealed amazement. "I've been a physician for 30 years, he told Kaveh on the third morning. "I've never seen anyone heal like this. Whatever gods watch over you, they're generous." Not gods, Kaveh thought. Ancient formulae and forgotten knowledge. But he kept that thought to himself. When he returned to his crew, Titus the foreman studied him critically. "Back already? I expected you'd be crippled for weeks." "I heal fast," Kaveh said simply. Apparently, Titus's eyes narrowed. "Well, healing fast just means you can work faster. Get to it." But something had changed in the quarries. As Kaveh worked, he noticed other slaves watching him, not with the usual dead-eyed indifference, but with something like respect. Some nodded to him as he passed. Others found excuses to work near him, as if proximity to his courage might transfer some of it to them. Even the overseers treated him differently, not with kindness. Romans didn't coddle slaves, but with a wary sort of respect. He'd proven he couldn't be easily broken, and that earned a measure of caution. Only Brutus continued to watch him with undisguised hatred. Kaveh knew that hatred would eventually find expression, probably in some petty cruelty or manufactured violation. But for now, the overseer seemed content to let the matter rest, perhaps warned by Gaius Marcellus not to let personal vendetta interfere with quarry operations. Weeks passed. Kaveh continued his nightly doses of the ancient formula, his body growing stronger, faster, more resilient with each passing day. He was careful to hide the extent of his improvements, but some changes were impossible to disguise completely. He could move blocks that should have required multiple men. He could work through the afternoon heat when others were flagging. He could remember every instruction, anticipate every need, operate with an efficiency that bordered on uncanny. The foreman noticed. "You've become a valuable asset, 17, Gaius Marcellus himself told Kaveh one day, inspecting the work area. "Productive slaves are rewarded. Continue your excellent performance, and perhaps we'll find you better assignments than hauling stone." It was the closest thing to praise a slave could expect. Then, 2 months after the flogging, everything changed again. A visitor arrived at the quarries, not uncommon, as merchants and officials often toured the operation to assess productivity and quality of the marble. But this visitor was different. He was old, perhaps 70, with the expensive clothing and bearing of a successful trader. But his eyes were young, sharp, calculating. They missed nothing as they scanned the quarries, evaluating not stone but human cargo. A slave trader. Kaveh recognized the type from stories and from the man who'd brought him to the quarries in chains. These men had a peculiar skill. They could assess a slave's value with a single glance, determining who might be trained as a house servant, who could work fields, who had potential for specialized tasks, and who might be material for the arena. The trader, whose name Kaveh heard was Quintus Vorenus, spent the morning touring the operation with Gaius Marcellus. They stopped occasionally to examine particular slaves, checking teeth, muscles, scars, making notes, discussing prices. When they reached Kaveh's section, Vorenus's eyes immediately fixed on him. "That one," the trader said, pointing. "The young one moving the rope crew. Tell me about him." Gaius Marcellus consulted his records. "Number 17, been here about 5 months. Eastern origin, captured in a raid. He's..." "Strong," Vorenus interrupted, watching as Kaveh helped drag a particularly massive block. "Very strong for his size and age, and efficient. Look how he positions himself, how he anticipates the movement of the block. There's intelligence there." "Yes, he's become one of our better workers," Gaius agreed. "Took 20 lashes a couple months ago and walked away, healed in days, remarkable durability." Vorenus's eyes gleamed with interest. Did he now? Tell me more. As Gaius recounted the story of Kave's defiance and punishment, Vorenus studied the young slave with increasing fascination. Courage, strength, resilience, intelligence, and still young enough to train properly. How much for him? He's not for sale, Gaius said firmly. Good slaves are hard to replace, and he's proven very productive. Everything is for sale at the right price. Vorenus pulled out a small leather purse and counted out gold coins, more gold than Kava had ever seen in his life. This should more than compensate for any loss of productivity. Gaius's resolve visibly weakened at the sight of so much gold. What do you want with him? He's a quarry worker, not trained for anything else. I have a school in Rome, Vorenus said quietly. A ludus, a training facility for gladiators. I'm always looking for promising material, and this boy, he smiled, this boy has potential. Raw potential, yes, but with proper training, proper motivation, he could become something special in the arena. Kava's blood ran cold. He'd heard of gladiators from Bashir's stories back in his village, warriors who fought in the great Colosseum for the entertainment of Rome. Some became famous, wealthy even. Most died young, torn apart by opponents or beasts, their lives measured in hours of spectacle. But gladiators, at least, had a chance at freedom. Survive long enough, please the crowd sufficiently, and you might earn your rudies, the wooden sword symbolizing manumission. It was a better chance than he'd ever have in the quarries, where the only certainty was a slow death by exhaustion and injury. Gaius looked at the gold, then at Kave, then back at the gold. Finally, he sighed. Very well, he's yours, but I want it noted that I'm selling under protest. That boy was valuable, and he'll be even more valuable in Rome, Vorenus assured him. He gestured to his guards. Bring the slave. As rough hands grabbed Kave and pulled him from his crew, he caught Darius's eyes across the quarry. The old Greek looked stricken, knowing what this meant but unable to intervene. Nikos called out, "Be strong, brother. We'll remember you." Even Zala, still recovering from his flogging but back at work, raised one massive hand in farewell. Kave was brought before Vorenus, who studied him closely, walking in a circle around him like a man examining a horse. "What's your name, boy? Your real name, not your number." "Kave, master." "Kave. Eastern. Good. The crowds love exotic fighters." Vorenus gripped Kave's chin and turned his head side to side. "Good bone structure. No major scars on the face. That's valuable. You'll be pretty enough to attract female admirers if you live long enough." He squeezed Kave's arms, shoulders, testing muscle density. "Strong, very strong. How old are you?" 16, master, I think. I've lost track of time." 16. Perfect. Old enough to have some strength and coordination, young enough to train properly. Most gladiators who start late never achieve real skill. They're just criminals and prisoners thrown to the beasts for entertainment. But you, trained from 16? Vorenus smiled. "You could become a true fighter, maybe even a champion." He stepped back and addressed Kava directly. "I'm offering you an opportunity, boy. The quarries will kill you eventually. Might take 5 years, might take 10, but they'll grind you into dust. But the arena, if you're good, if you're lucky, if you're smart, you could win your freedom, could become famous, could live like a free man even before your manumission. Rome loves its gladiators, loves them more than it loves some of its citizens. Fight well, survive, and you'll have a life worth living." He paused. "Of course, you might also die in your first bout, torn apart by a veteran fighter or a hungry lion. The arena is honest in its cruelty. It kills quickly rather than slowly. So what do you say, Kava? Ready to trade certain slow death for possible glory? Perhaps 3 seconds, Kava thought about it. The quarries would indeed kill him, eventually. His enhanced abilities might delay that death, but not prevent it. The arena at least offered a chance. Slim, perhaps, but real, at something more. And maybe, just maybe, his abilities would give him an edge in combat. Strength, speed, clarity of mind, all the gifts of the ancient formula. In the quarries, they just helped him survive. In the arena, they might make him exceptional. I'm ready, Master, Kava said. Vorenus grinned. Good answer. You'll do well, or die trying. Either way, it'll be entertaining. He turned to his guards. Chain him with the others. We leave for Rome in an hour. As they fitted Kava with traveling chains, lighter than the ones he'd worn on his first journey from his village, but still heavy reminders of his status, he looked back at the quarries one last time. He'd survived 5 months in hell. He'd discovered ancient secrets. He'd shown courage in the face of cruelty. He'd given hope to the hopeless. And now he was being sent to Rome, to the Colosseum, to become a gladiator, a word that meant swordsman, but really meant man who dies for entertainment. But Kaveh didn't plan to die. He planned to survive, to fight, to win, and eventually to reclaim his freedom. Not through endurance this time, but through skill and strength and the power flowing through his veins. The boy who'd left his village in chains was gone. The slave who'd broken stone in the quarries was gone. Now began the next transformation, from slave to warrior, from victim to fighter, from powerless to powerful. The journey to Rome awaited, and with it, a destiny written in blood and sand. Chapter 10. The Eternal City. The journey to Rome took 12 days, but this time Kava traveled not as part of a condemned mass of prisoners, but as valuable property, carefully guarded and reasonably maintained. Vorenus understood that gladiators were investments. Damage them before they reached the ludus, and you'd wasted good gold. They traveled in a covered wagon, Kava chained with 5 other slaves, all young men, all recently purchased from various sources around the empire. There was a Gaul named Brennus, not the same one from the quarries, tall and red-haired with the build of a warrior. A Numidian named Juba, lean and fast with the look of a hunter. A German called Alaric, massive and blond, who spoke almost no Latin. A Greek named Alexios, smaller but quick and clever-eyed. And a Thracian named Spartacus, a name that made Vorenus laugh darkly. You know what happened to the last famous Spartacus? The traitor asked the young Thracian. Led the greatest slave rebellion in Roman history, terrified the Republic for years, and died with thousands of his followers crucified along the Appian Way. That name might be Bad Luck Boy, or Good Luck, Spartacus replied quietly. He died free fighting, better than dying in chains. Vorenus studied him thoughtfully. You've got spirit. Good. The arena rewards spirit or breaks it. We'll see which happens to you. During the journey, Kaveh learned about his fellow slaves. Brennus had been a warrior in his tribe before capture, already skilled with weapons. Juba had been a hunter, able to track and kill with spear and bow. Alaric was a chieftain's son, trained to fight from childhood. Alexios had been a Pancratian fighter, Greek wrestling, before being enslaved for debt. Spartacus wouldn't speak of his past, but his hands bore the calluses of someone who'd trained with sword and shield. They were all, in different ways, already warriors, and Kaveh realized with growing unease that he was the only one who'd never held a weapon in combat, never trained to fight. His advantages, strength, speed, mental clarity, meant nothing if he didn't know how to use them. You're nervous, Alexios observed one evening as they camped. Worried about training? I've never fought, Kaveh admitted. Not really. I threw punches at a Roman soldier when my village was raided. But that's it. Then you'll learn. The ludus will teach you everything if you survive the teaching. Gladiator training is brutal. Many don't make it through. But those who do, he smiled grimly. Those who do become weapons in human form. How do you know so much about gladiator training? My father was a trainer before he died. He taught pancration to noble sons, but he knew gladiators too. Used to tell me stories about the great fighters he'd seen, the champions who could control a crowd with a gesture, who made killing look like dance. Alexios's expression grew distant. He said the greatest gladiators weren't the strongest or the fastest, but the smartest, the ones who understood that the arena was part combat, part theater. You had to win fights, yes, but you also had to win hearts. As they drew closer to Rome, other travelers on the road increased. The great city drew people like a lodestone, merchants seeking profit, officials on state business, pilgrims visiting temples, soldiers returning from distant wars, and slaves. Always slaves. Rome's appetite for labor was endless. On the 10th day, they crested a hill and saw it for the first time. Rome. The eternal city sprawled across 7 hills, a vast urban landscape of marble temples, brick insulae, bustling forums, and endless streets. Even from miles away, Kaveh could hear it. The roar of 1 million people living, working, fighting, dying in humanity's greatest city. And rising above it all, dominating the skyline like a great stone beast, was the Colosseum. Even unfinished, for the great amphitheater was still being constructed in places. It was the largest structure Kaveh had ever seen. Massive arches rose 4 stories high, each level adorned with columns and statues. The arena could swallow his entire village 20 times over. Beautiful, isn't it? Vorenus said, seeing Kaveh's awestruck expression. The Flavian amphitheater, though everyone calls it the Colosseum. 50,000 people can watch the games there. 50,000 voices screaming for blood and glory. That's where you'll fight, if you live through training. That's where you'll either die forgotten or achieve fame that echoes through centuries. They entered Rome through the Porta Capena, one of the great gates in the Servian wall. Guards examined Vorenus's papers, noted the slave cargo, and waved them through after collecting appropriate taxes. Inside the city, Kaveh experienced sensory overload. The streets teemed with people from every corner of the known world. Romans in togas, soldiers in armor, merchants hawking goods, street performers juggling and dancing, beggars pleading for coins, slaves carrying everything from water to noble ladies in litters. The smell was overwhelming. Cooking food, human waste, incense from temples, the sharp tang of metalworking, the earthy smell of animals being driven to market. The noise was constant, 1,000 conversations in 12 languages, the clatter of cartwheels on paving stones, the cries of vendors, the chanting of priests. They passed through the forum where the political heart of empire beat. Great temples rose on every side, temples to Jupiter, to Mars, to Venus. The Senate House stood imposing and austere, where the most powerful men in the world debated policy that affected millions. Public speakers harangued crowds from the rostra, the ancient speaker's platform. "This is the center of the world," Vorenus told his cargo, speaking like a tour guide. "Every road leads to Rome. Every victory is celebrated here. Every defeat is mourned here. The decisions made in these buildings affect people from Britannia to Syria, from Germania to Africa. This is what empire looks like." Then they turned away from the grand public spaces and entered a different Rome. the back streets and working districts where the city's less glorious business occurred. Here were the workshops and warehouses, the gladiator schools and beast cages, the training grounds where men learned to kill and die for entertainment. Vorenus's ludus occupied a large compound in the Subura district, not the most fashionable area, but close enough to the Colosseum to be convenient for the games. High walls surrounded the compound, topped with iron spikes and patrolled by armed guards. Within those walls, several buildings clustered around a central training yard, barracks for the gladiators, storerooms for equipment, a small arena for practice, and the Dominus's house where Vorenus lived and conducted his business. The gates opened, and the wagon rolled into the yard. Immediately, activity stopped as current gladiators and trainers paused to examine the new arrivals. Kaveh felt their eyes on him, evaluating, measuring, determining threat level and potential. Most looked dangerous, scarred, muscled, moving with the controlled grace of professional fighters. These were men who'd survived the arena, who'd killed to stay alive, who'd learned to transform fear into fury. This would be his new family, his new world, his new hell, or his path to salvation. A man emerged from the Dominus's house, younger than Vorenus, perhaps 40, with the build of a former gladiator gone slightly to seed. His face bore scars, and he moved with a slight limp, but his eyes were sharp and assessing. "Dr. Lucius," Vorenus called out, "I've brought you fresh meat." 6 new recruits, all with potential. Lucius, the doctor or master trainer, approached the wagon and studied the chained slaves with the expression of someone who'd seen 1,000 hopefuls and knew most would die quickly. "Potential," he repeated dryly. "They all have potential until their guts are on the sand. Very well, let's see what you've wasted gold on this time." He ordered them unchained and lined up. One by one he examined them, testing reflexes, checking muscle tone, asking about experience. When he reached Kava, he frowned. "This one's young." 16? "Yes, but special. Took 20 lashes and walked away. Healed in days. Strong as men twice his age. And smart. Watch his eyes. He's thinking, analyzing, learning even now." Lucius stared into Kava's eyes for a long moment. "What's your name, boy?" "Kaveh, master." "You've never trained as a fighter?" "No, master." "Ever killed anyone?" "No, master." "Ever wanted to kill anyone?" Kava thought of the Roman who'd struck his father down, of Brutus the overseer, of all the casual cruelties he'd witnessed and endured. "Yes, master." Lucius smiled faintly. "Honest. Good. Liars don't last in the arena. The sand reveals truth." He turned to Vorenus. "Fine. I'll train them. Same deal as always. You provide food and equipment, I provide training. They die in the first year. That's the risk you took. They survive and start winning. We split profits 60-40. 50-50, Vorenus countered. 60-40. You provide bodies, I transform them into gladiators. My skill is worth more than your gold. They negotiated for a few more minutes before settling on 55-45 in Lucius's favor. The trainer clearly had the better position in these discussions. Once business was concluded, Lucius turned his attention fully to the new recruits. "Welcome to the Ludus Vorenus. I am Dr. Lucius, and for the next months or years, if you live that long, I am your father, your teacher, your god, and your worst nightmare. You will train 6 days a week, dawn to dusk. You will learn weapons, tactics, showmanship, and survival. You will learn to fight, to bleed, and to kill. Most of you will die in your first real combat. A few might survive to fight again. Perhaps one of you, maybe, will become a true gladiator, a warrior whose name is remembered." He began pacing before them like a general before troops. "Forget whatever you were before. You are not warriors. You are not men. You are not even slaves. You are tiro, recruits, beginners, less than nothing. You will earn the right to be called gladiators with blood and sweat and survival. Until then, you're just meat waiting for the butcher." He paused, letting his words sink in. "The rules are simple. Obey instantly, train seriously, respect the weapons and the craft. Do these things and you might survive. Fail and you'll die forgotten, your body dumped in a mass grave with the other failures. Are we clear?" "Yes, doctor," they answered in a ragged chorus. "Pathetic. Again, like you mean it." "Yes, doctor," this time in unison, with force. "Better. Now follow me. Time to show you where you'll sleep, eat, and train until you either die or become something worth the sand you'll bleed on." As they followed Lucius deeper into the compound, Kava took in every detail: the layout of the buildings, the locations of weapon storage, the sight of advanced gladiators sparring in the practice arena, the smell of leather and oil and blood and sweat that permeated everything. This was his new world. Here, he would transform from slave to warrior. Here, he would learn to survive not through endurance, but through skill. Here, he would become something the Romans feared even as they cheered for him. The boy from the desert village, the slave from the quarries, was about to become a gladiator. And perhaps, if he was strong enough and smart enough and lucky enough, he would become a champion. The path to freedom lay through blood and sand. Time to walk that path. Chapter 11. The Forging of a Gladiator. Training began at dawn the next morning, before the sun had fully risen over Rome's 7 hills. A slave, one of the support staff who kept the ludus functioning, moved through the barracks ringing a bronze bell, its sharp clang dragging the new recruits from their first night's sleep. Kavi rose quickly, his body already adapting to the rhythm of early waking. Around him, the other recruits stirred more slowly, Brennus cursing in Gaulish, Alaric groaning, Spartacus already alert and watchful. They were herded to the washing area, a simple courtyard with troughs of cold water, and told to clean themselves. "Gladiators may die dirty," one of the support slaves explained, "but they train clean. Disease kills more fighters than combat. Keep yourselves washed." Then came breakfast. Porridge made from barley, a piece of bread, dates, and watered wine. Not luxurious, but far better than what Kave had received in the quarries. Gladiators were valuable. They needed fuel to build muscle and maintain strength. "Eat well," advised an older gladiator who sat nearby, a man with more scars than Kave could count. "Training will burn through everything you put in your body. You'll be hungry again by midday, and you won't get more food until evening. So eat now, eat everything, and be grateful." After breakfast, they were led to the training yard, a large rectangular space of packed sand, its perimeter lined with wooden posts of various heights and thicknesses. Weapons racks stood at intervals, holding wooden training swords, spears, shields, and other equipment. Dr. Lucius waited for them, flanked by several assistant trainers, all former gladiators, all wearing the wooden rudies on cords around their necks, the symbol of their freedom earned through survival. "Today you begin learning what it means to be a gladiator," Lucius announced. "But before you touch a weapon, before you learn a single technique, you must build the foundation. A gladiator's body is his primary weapon. Without strength, speed, and endurance, all the skill in the world is worthless." What followed was brutal. They started with running, circuits around the training yard, then expanding to run through the compound's perimeter. Just when Kava thought they'd finished, Lucius ordered more laps, and more, until even Alaric, the massive German, was stumbling. Then came exercises Kava had never imagined, lifting heavy stones repeatedly until arms shook and gave out, holding shields at arm's length until shoulders burned, squatting with sandbags until legs trembled, climbing ropes until hands bled, wrestling each other until everyone was bruised and exhausted. A gladiator fights for minutes, sometimes longer, Lucius explained as they gasped and sweated. But those minutes require absolute effort. Your body must be capable of explosive power, sustained exertion, and rapid recovery. This is how we build that capability. The morning session lasted 4 hours. By the end, all 6 recruits were barely standing. Even Kava, with his enhanced abilities, felt the strain. Though he noticed he recovered faster than the others, his breathing returning to normal while they still gasped. He had to be careful about that. The ancient formula gave him advantages, but showing too much too soon would raise questions he couldn't answer. Midday brought another meal. Lentil stew with pork, more bread, vegetables. Again, better food than most slaves received. The Ludus understood that gladiators needed proper nutrition. "This is the gladiator diet," Lucius told them as they ate. "High in barley and beans. We call gladiators barley men because that's what builds this kind of muscle. Your bodies are being transformed into weapons. Feed them accordingly." The afternoon session introduced them to weapons, but not to use them yet. Instead, they practiced movements without tools. Lucius demonstrated the basic stance, the footwork, the angles of attack and defense that underpinned all gladiatorial combat. "Every style of gladiator has different techniques," he explained, moving through forms with the grace of a dancer. The Murmillo with his heavy helmet and large shield fights differently than the Retiarius with his net and trident. The Thracian with his curved sword and small shield has different tactics than the Hoplomachus with his spear, but all share fundamentals: balance, distance management, timing, and reading your opponent. They drilled the basic footwork until their legs screamed. Forward, back, side to side, at angles, always balanced, always ready to move in any direction. It looked simple, but was maddeningly difficult. Maintaining perfect form while exhausted, keeping centered while moving, staying light on feet that felt like lead weights. "The arena sand is soft and uneven," Lucius told them. "One missed step, one moment of poor balance, and you're dead. The sand is already dark with the blood of fighters who had everything except good footwork." Kaveh found the footwork challenging but fascinating. His enhanced speed and coordination helped, but the real advantage was his mental clarity. He could analyze the movement patterns, understand the geometry of positioning, predict where his body needed to be in response to theoretical attacks. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Lucius finally called a halt. "First day complete. You've survived. Tomorrow will be harder. Every day will be harder until you're ready. Dismissed." They staggered back to the barracks, muscles screaming, bodies covered in sweat and sand. But there was something different in the air, a sense of shared ordeal, of having endured together. Even Alaric, who spoke little Latin, managed a grin and a thumbs up to the others. That night, after another substantial meal, Kaveh lay on his pallet and carefully retrieved the clay vessels he'd hidden in his belongings. He still had enough of the ancient formula for months of doses, carefully rationed. He mixed a small portion with water and drank it, feeling the familiar warmth spread through his body. The formula would help him recover faster, train harder, improve more quickly. But he had to be subtle about it. Had to make his progress seem remarkable but not impossible. Had to walk the line between exceptional and supernatural. "You heal fast," Alexios observed from the next pallet. "I saw you during training. You recovered from exertion faster than anyone else." "I've always been that way," Kava said carefully. "Just lucky, I guess." Luck is a resource like any other in the arena. If you have it, use it. Just don't rely on it exclusively. Luck runs out eventually. Over the following weeks, training intensified. They progressed from conditioning to basic weapon work, each recruit being evaluated for which gladiator type suited their build and abilities. Brennus, tall and strong, was being trained as a mormillo, a heavily armored fighter with large rectangular shield and gladius sword, designed to wear down opponents through defense and powerful strikes. Juba, lean and quick, was assigned to train as a retiarius, the net fighter, lightly armored, relying on speed and reach with net and trident to control distance and trap opponents. Alaric, massive and powerful, would become a secutor, the chaser, with enclosed helmet and medium shield, designed to hunt down more mobile opponents through relentless pressure. Alexios, trained in Greek wrestling, was being developed as a Dimicharis, dual wielder, fighting with two swords, emphasizing speed and technical skill over power. Spartacus was assigned the Thracian style, named after his homeland, fighting with curved Sika sword and small rectangular shield, balanced between offense and defense. And Cava. Lucius studied him for days before deciding. "You're unusual," the doctor told him during a private evaluation. "You're strong, but not massive like Alaric. You're quick, but not as fast as Juba. You're skilled, but not as technical as Alexios. But you have something else, adaptability. You learn faster than anyone I've trained. You can analyze and adjust in moments. And you have this quality—" He paused, searching for words. "This presence. When you move, people watch. That's valuable in the arena." He handed Cave a wooden training sword and shield, medium-sized, balanced. "We'll train you as a provocator, a challenger. It's a versatile style, neither heavily armored nor lightly equipped. You'll wear a breastplate, medium helmet, one greave, and carry a gladius and rectangular shield. The provocator relies on balanced skills, good offense, good defense, good movement, and the ability to adapt to different opponents. It's also," Lucius added with a slight smile, "one of the most prestigious styles. Provocators usually fight other provocators in featured bouts. The crowds love them because they're true swordsmen. No gimmicks, no special weapons, just skill against skill. If you become a good provocator, you'll fight in prime time slots, earn more money, and have better chances at freedom." Training became more specific. Cave drilled endlessly with sword and shield, attack patterns, defensive positions, combinations of moves. He learned to use the shield not just for blocking, but as a weapon itself, smashing it into opponents to create openings. He learned to read body language, to see attacks telegraphed in shoulder movements and weight shifts, and he improved rapidly. The combination of natural ability, enhanced physiology from the ancient formula, and intense focus allowed him to progress in weeks what usually took months. Within 2 months, he was sparring with trained gladiators and occasionally winning. "You're ready," Lucius told him after one particularly successful sparring session. "Not ready for a featured bout, but ready for your first real fight. Vorenus has secured you a slot in the upcoming games, a preliminary bout fighting another Tiro. Win, and you begin your career. Lose, and—" he shrugged. "Try not to lose." Cave's first real fight was 10 days away. 10 days to prepare for the moment that would define everything. Kill or be killed, triumph or die, become a gladiator or become a corpse. Chapter 12. First Blood on the Sand. The days before Cave's first fight passed in a blur of final preparations. Lucius worked with him intensively, drilling specific scenarios, teaching him how to work the crowd, explaining the unwritten rules of arena combat. "The fight isn't just about killing your opponent," Lucius explained. "It's about entertaining the audience. They want to see skill, courage, and drama. A quick, brutal kill might be efficient, but it's boring. You need to show them a contest. Back and forth, near misses. displays of technique. Make them invest in you emotionally. But I still have to win, Kava said. Yes, entertainment only matters if you survive, but surviving only matters if you give them a reason to want you alive. It's a balance. Learn it quickly. Your life depends on it. The night before the fight, Kaveh couldn't sleep. He lay on his pallet staring at the darkness, feeling the weight of what was coming. Tomorrow, for the first time in his life, he would try to kill another human being, not in the desperate panic of defending his family during the raid, but deliberately, with training and intent. Could he do it? He'd survived the quarries through endurance. Could he survive the arena through violence? The ancient formula flowing through his veins would give him advantages, strength, speed, clarity, but would it give him the will to kill? Can't sleep? Alexios's voice came from the darkness. The Greek had fought twice already, winning both times. Normal before your first fight. Everyone wonders if they can do it. Could you? That first time? I didn't know until the moment came. Then instinct took over. Training, survival reflex, whatever you want to call it. Your body does what it's been trained to do. The mind catches up later. He paused. The real question isn't whether you can kill. It's whether you can live with having killed. And can you? I'm still here, aren't I? I decided killing strangers in the arena to earn my freedom was preferable to dying a slave. Whether that makes me a good person or a practical one, I honestly don't know. Dawn came too quickly. Kava rose, washed, ate breakfast though his stomach churned, and prepared his equipment. The armor felt heavier than during training, more real. The wooden practice sword was replaced with actual gladius, iron blade sharp enough to split skin with the slightest touch. This was real. This was happening. A wagon arrived to transport fighters to the Colosseum. Kaveh climbed aboard with 5 other gladiators scheduled for the day's preliminary bouts, including Spartacus, who would fight in the slot before Kaveh's. The ride through Rome's streets felt surreal. Citizens went about their daily business, buying bread and gossiping, while in this wagon, men traveled to possible death. 2 worlds existing simultaneously, separated by a thin boundary. Then they arrived, and Kaveh saw the Colosseum up close for the first time. It was even more massive than it had appeared from a distance. The outer wall rose 4 stories, each level marked by different architectural orders: Doric, Ionic, Corinthian. Arches everywhere, each one large enough to drive a wagon through. And the noise, even from outside, Kaveh could hear the roar of tens of thousands of voices, a sound like thunder or ocean waves, primal and terrifying. They were led through one of the lower entrances into the hypogeum, the underground network of tunnels and chambers beneath the arena floor. Here, in flickering torchlight, fighters prepared, beasts paced in cages, and stage machinery waited to lift scenery and combatants to the sand above. "Wait here," a functionary told them, pointing to a holding area. "You'll be called when it's your turn." The preliminary bouts began. Criminals executed by beasts, condemned prisoners forced to kill each other without training or armor. The entertainment that preceded the real gladiatorial contests. Kaveh could hear the crowd's reactions filtering down through the stone. Cheers, jeers, gasps, laughter. To them, this was a show. To the people dying above, it was the last moments of their lives. Then came the first actual gladiatorial bout. 2 experienced fighters, a Murmillo versus a Retiarius. Kaveh could hear the announcement, the crowd's roar of approval, then the sounds of combat, the clash of weapons, the thud of bodies hitting sand, the crowd's rhythmic chanting. After 15 minutes, a single massive cheer signaled the end. Someone had won, Someone had lost. Would the loser be spared or executed? Kava didn't know. 3 more bouts. Then Spartacus was called. The young Thracian gripped his psyche and small shield, took a deep breath, and walked toward the ramp that led to the arena floor. He looked back once, meeting Kava's eyes, and nodded. Brothers in arms, if only for a moment. Then he was gone, climbing toward light and sound and fate. Kava heard the announcements, the combatants' names, their styles, their records. Spartacus was 0-0. His opponent was 2-1. The crowd's noise suggested they expected the experienced fighter to win easily. The fight lasted 12 minutes. Kava counted, trying to distract himself from what was coming. He heard the ebb and flow of combat, the crowd's reaction suggesting momentum shifts, then a huge roar and silence, and finally another roar, different quality, approving rather than bloodthirsty. Spartacus descended the ramp, bleeding from a shoulder wound but walking on his own feet. He'd won. He'd survived. He begged, Spartacus said quietly to Kava as he passed. At the end, my opponent begged for mercy. I looked at the crowd, and they were screaming thumbs down. Kill him. So I did. I killed him because 50,000 Romans wanted to see it. His eyes were haunted. Remember that. You're not really fighting your opponent. You're fighting the crowd's will. Then a functionary called, "Kava of the East, you're next." This was it. The moment everything had been leading toward. Kava picked up his shield and gladius, their weight familiar from training, but utterly different now. He walked toward the ramp, toward the light, toward the sound of the largest crowd he'd ever imagined. The ramp sloped upward. With each step, the light grew brighter, the sound grew louder. Then he emerged onto the sand, and his senses were overwhelmed. The Colosseum was full, 50,000 people packed into tiers of seating that rose toward the sky. Every face turned toward the arena floor. The sound of their voices was physical, pressing against him like a wave. The sun blazed down from directly overhead, reflecting off white sand that was stained dark in patches, blood from earlier bouts. Across the arena, perhaps 60 feet away, his opponent emerged, a young man like himself, maybe 18, with the olive skin of a Grecian or Syrian. He carried the same equipment, provocator versus provocator, balanced match. The announcer's voice boomed through the Colosseum, magically amplified in a way Kava didn't understand. "Citizens of Rome, for your entertainment, a contest of Tiro, new blood for the sand, from the ludus Vorenus, making his arena debut, Kava of the East." Scattered cheers, mostly indifferent. He was unknown, untested, not worth strong opinion yet, and from the ludus Gallus, with one victory to his name, Demetrios of Rhodes. Louder cheers. The crowd recognized the name, approved of his previous performance. The fighters approached the editor's box, the sponsor's seat, occupied today by a wealthy merchant who'd paid for these games. They saluted, raising their weapons. "Av, we who are about to die salute you." The traditional words felt heavy in Kava's mouth. He might actually die in the next few minutes. This might be the last sky he'd see, the last breath he'd take. The merchant waved his hand. "Begin." Demetrios moved first, circling right, shield up, sword ready. Kava mirrored him, circling left, looking for openings, trying to remember training while his heart hammered and the crowd screamed. They tested each other with probing attacks, Demetrios jabbing with his gladius, Kava blocking with his shield. Neither committed fully yet, both learning their opponent's speed and reactions. The crowd began to jeer, too cautious, too boring. They wanted blood. Demetrios lunged suddenly, a committed attack aimed at Kava's exposed right side. Kava pivoted, bringing his shield across, deflecting the blade, then counter-struck toward Demetrios's head. The Rhodian ducked, rolled away, came up ready. Now they engaged seriously. Blades clashed, shields banged together, sand kicked up around their feet. Demetrios was good. His one previous victory had taught him things training couldn't. He knew how to create angles, how to use his shield aggressively, how to manage distance. But Kaveh had advantages Demetrios couldn't see. His enhanced speed meant he could react to attacks fractionally faster. His strength meant he could absorb shield impacts that should have staggered him. His clarity meant he could process the fight's flow, see patterns, anticipate. 3 minutes in, Kaveh found his rhythm. He stopped thinking consciously and let training merge with enhancement. His body knew what to do. Block here, strike there, pivot, advance, create pressure. Demetrios's breathing grew labored. Sweat poured down his face. He was strong, skilled, experienced, but Kaveh was better. Not dramatically, not obviously, but enough. The crowd sensed the shift. The jeering stopped. They began to cheer, to stomp their feet in rhythm, to create a pulse that drove the fight forward. Kaveh pressed his advantage. He drove Demetrios back across the sand, attacking high and low, forcing the Rhodian to defend frantically. Demetrios blocked desperately, countered when he could, but he was losing ground, losing energy, losing hope. Then Kaveh saw his opening. Demetrios raised his shield a fraction too high, covering his face, leaving his leg exposed. The same mistake Kaveh had made in training, corrected through countless repetitions. He could go for the kill, thrust his gladius into Demetrios's throat, end this quickly. But he remembered Lucius's words. Entertainment only matters if you survive, but surviving only matters if you give them a reason to want you alive. Instead of killing, Kaveh cut, a slashing strike across Demetrios's thigh, deep enough to wound but not fatal. Demetrios screamed and fell to one knee, blood streaming. His leg wouldn't support him anymore. Kaveh stepped back, lowered his gladius slightly, looked up at the crowd. The roar was deafening. They approved. They'd seen skill, seen mercy, seen a fighter who understood the show. Demetrios tried to rise, failed, collapsed. He looked at Kaveh with pain and fear and resignation in his eyes. He knew what came next. The merchant sponsor stood, holding his hand out, thumb horizontal, asking the crowd's judgment. "Missio," some voices shouted. "Let him live. He fought well." "Ugula," others screamed. "Kill him. We want blood." The merchant's thumb wavered. The crowd's voices blended into chaos. Then slowly, very slowly, the thumb turned upward. "Missio. Let him live." Demetrios collapsed in relief. Guards rushed onto the sand to carry him away for medical treatment. He'd survive, would fight again, had been granted mercy. And Kaveh stood alone on the sand, gladius still in hand, and the crowd chanted his name, a name they'd never heard before today, now being shouted by thousands of voices. "Kaveh! Kaveh! Kaveh!" He'd won, he'd survived, he'd given them a show, demonstrated skill, and earned mercy for a defeated opponent. His first fight was a success. As he walked back down the ramp, descending from light into shadow, from thunder into quiet, his hands began to shake. Reaction setting in. He'd nearly killed someone, had wounded him badly, and 50,000 people had screamed their approval. This was his life now, blood and sand and spectacle. But he'd survived. He'd won. And he'd taken the first step toward the freedom that lay somewhere beyond the roar of the crowd and the red stain of blood on white sand. Dicho, Chapter 13. The Rise of a Champion. 3 months after his first victory, Kaveh had fought 6 times and won all 6. 3 times he'd been granted the privilege of sparing his defeated opponent. 3 times the crowd had demanded death, and he'd delivered it. Not from cruelty, but from necessity, understanding that defying the crowd's bloodlust too often would turn them against him. Each kill haunted him. Each night he saw their faces, Young men like himself, slaves and prisoners and criminals, all dying for entertainment. But he learned to compartmentalize, to separate the arena from his inner self, to survive psychologically as well as physically, and he was becoming famous. The crowd loved him. They loved his youth, his exotic Eastern looks, his balanced fighting style, his tendency to show mercy when possible. Women threw flowers and ribbons onto the sand after his victories. Men shouted his name in the streets. Children played games pretending to be him. The ludists benefited financially from his success. Vorenus charged higher fees to feature Kava in games. Merchants paid to sponsor bouts specifically requesting him. And the gladiator himself received his share, a modest portion of the winnings, carefully saved in a small chest, coin by coin building toward eventual freedom. "You're becoming a star," Lucius told him after his 7th victory. "The crowds call you the Desert Lion, young, fierce, noble. They see you as a hero." "I'm a slave who kills for entertainment," Kaveh replied quietly. "Yes, but you're a slave who might buy his freedom if you keep winning. That's more hope than most slaves ever have. Don't waste it on guilt." Training intensified. Kaveh now sparred primarily with experienced gladiators, learning advanced techniques, studying different styles. The ancient formula continued to enhance his abilities, but carefully. He'd learned to moderate his doses, to keep his improvements impressive, but not impossible. His fellow recruits had varied fates. Brennus had won 3 of 5 fights and was slowly building a reputation. Juba had won 2 of 3, his speed and network fascinating the crowds. Alaric had won 4 of 4 through sheer brutal power. Alexios was 5-1, his dual sword style popular with sophisticated audiences. But Spartacus had died in his 3rd fight, overwhelmed by a veteran secutor, denied mercy by a bloodthirsty crowd. His body was dumped in the common grave, his name forgotten by everyone except his fellow gladiators. A reminder that skill and courage meant nothing if luck turned bad. 6 months in, Kava faced his first ranked opponent, a gladiator named Marcus, called the Bear for his massive size and crushing style. Marcus was 15-2, a decorated fighter who'd won his freedom and now fought for gold and glory. A voluntary gladiator, which somehow made him more dangerous. He wanted to be in the arena. The fight was scheduled for prime time, a featured bout with high stakes. Win and Kava would be ranked among the top fighters. Lose, and he'd likely die. Marcus had a reputation for never granting mercy. The night before, Kava doubled his dose of the ancient formula. He needed every advantage against someone like the Bear. When he emerged onto the sand the next day, the crowd's reaction was deafening. They'd come specifically to see this fight, the rising young champion versus the established veteran. The Colosseum was packed beyond capacity, people standing in the aisles, climbing on railings for better views. Marcus entered from the opposite gate, 6.5 feet tall, 250 pounds of muscle and scar tissue, carrying a huge shield and gladius. He moved with surprising grace for his size, and his eyes held the cold calculation of someone who'd killed dozens of men. The announcer whipped the crowd into frenzy. The Bear versus the Desert Lion, experience versus youth, power versus speed. Who will stand at the end? They saluted the editor, today a Roman senator with political ambitions. Then the signal came, begin. Marcus didn't circle or test. He charged immediately, shield raised like a battering ram, gladius ready to thrust. It was like being charged by a literal bear, unstoppable force aimed directly at destruction. Kava dodged right, barely avoiding the shield bash, struck at Marcus's exposed side. His gladius scraped across armor, doing no damage. Marcus pivoted with shocking speed and backhanded his shield into Kava's head. Stars exploded across Kava's vision. He stumbled backward, shield barely up in time to block Marcus's follow-up thrust. The power behind that thrust was incredible. It drove Kava back several steps despite his enhanced strength. The crowd roared. This was the violence they craved. Marcus pressed his advantage, using his size and power to drive Kava across the sand. Every shield bash felt like being hit by a wall. Every sword strike had killing force behind it. This wasn't the cautious probing of other fights. This was a veteran trying to end things quickly. Kava fought defensively, blocking and dodging, looking for openings that didn't exist. Marcus's defense was too good, his attack too relentless. Minutes passed, and Kava was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, breathing hard, his arms aching from the constant impacts. He was losing. The crowd sensed it. Their cheers had an edge of disappointment. They'd wanted a better contest from their desert lion. Then Kava remembered something Lucius had taught. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. But first, you have to make them fall. Use their strength against them. Next time Marcus charged, Kava didn't dodge fully away. Instead, he stepped into the charge at an angle, dropping low, and drove his shield's edge into Marcus's leading knee. The joint buckled. Marcus roared in pain and rage, stumbled, caught himself, but his charge's momentum was broken. Now Kava attacked. He was faster than Marcus, more agile. He struck from angles, targeting the injured knee, forcing the bigger man to pivot and turn, wearing him down. Each movement stressed the damaged joint. Each rotation brought grimaces of pain. The fight's momentum shifted. Marcus's attacks became slower, less certain. His defense developed gaps, and Kava, drawing on the ancient formula's gifts of speed and endurance, pressed harder. 10 minutes in, Marcus was limping badly. 15 minutes, he could barely put weight on the injured leg. The crowd, fickle as always, began cheering for Kava again, appreciating his tactical brilliance. At 20 minutes, Kava saw his chance. Marcus made a desperate lunge, committing fully to a killing thrust. Kava sidestepped, and as the bigger man's momentum carried him forward, Kava struck. His gladius driving between armor plates, punching through to lung. Marcus gasped, blood bubbling from his mouth. He dropped his weapons, fell to his knees, clutching the wound. Kava stood over him, gladius ready for the finishing blow. He looked up at the editor's box, at the crowd, waiting for judgment. The noise was incredible. Thousands of voices screaming different things. But slowly a chant emerged, growing louder. Missio, Missio, Missio. Let him live. The famous bear, defeated but not destroyed. Mercy for a warrior who'd given them years of entertainment. The senator stood, considered, then turned his thumb upward. Mercy granted. Marcus looked at Kava with something like respect. Good fight, boy. You earned this. Then he collapsed as medical slaves rushed to carry him away, and Kava stood alone on the sand, victorious, having defeated one of Rome's greatest gladiators in only his 8th fight. The crowd didn't just cheer. They screamed, they stomped, they threw flowers and coins and jewelry onto the sand. Women blew kisses, men shouted his name. The entire Colosseum shook with their approval. Kava raised his gladius, acknowledging them, playing the role. But inside, he felt hollow. He'd nearly died, had killed or nearly killed 8 men now, was becoming the thing they wanted him to be, a weapon, a show, a creature of blood and spectacle. But he was alive, was winning, was accumulating gold, was moving closer, victory by victory, to buying his freedom. That night, back at the Ludus, his fellow gladiators celebrated. Even Lucius seemed pleased, knowing that having a ranked fighter in his school brought prestige and profit. You're on the path, the doctor told Kava privately. Another year like this, maybe 2, and you'll have enough gold to buy your freedom. Keep winning, stay alive, and you'll walk away from the arena a free man. And if I don't want to wait 2 years? Kaveh asked. Lucius's eyes narrowed. What are you thinking? There's a tournament coming, isn't there? The Emperor's Games, celebrating his 5th year of rule. Champions from every ludus in Rome competing. Grand prize of 50,000 denarii and immediate freedom. You're mad. That tournament is for veterans, established champions. You've been fighting less than a year. You're good, yes, but you're not ready for that level of competition. I'm ready, Kaveh said quietly, and I'm entering. Lucius studied him for a long moment. The confidence of youth. It'll either carry you to glory or get you killed. He sighed. Very well. I'll register you for the tournament. But understand, this isn't like regular fights. This is single elimination. Lose once, you're done. And you'll be facing the best gladiators in Rome. Men who've survived dozens of bouts. Men who'll kill you without hesitation. I understand. Do you? Because glory's intoxicating, boy. It makes you think you're invincible. But you're not. You're human, you can die, and the sand doesn't care about your dreams. Kaveh met his eyes steadily. I know I can die. I've known that since the night my village burned. But I also know I can't spend years slowly killing strangers for coins. The tournament offers a chance at freedom now. I have to take it. Chapter 14. The Emperor's Tournament. The Emperor's Games were scheduled over 5 days, a spectacle designed to demonstrate Rome's power and glory. The gladiatorial tournament was the centerpiece, 64 fighters, single elimination, with the final bout taking place before the Emperor himself. The prize, 50,000 denarii, a fortune that could buy a comfortable life anywhere in the empire, and immediate freedom, with the wooden rudies presented by the Emperor's own hand. Kaveh prepared intensively for the 2 weeks leading up to the tournament. He trained harder than ever, studying potential opponents, refining techniques, pushing his enhanced body to new limits. The ancient formula was running low. He had perhaps 20 doses remaining, so he used them strategically, taking larger amounts before important training sessions. The other gladiators from his ludus watched his preparations with mixed emotions. Brennus wished him luck, but warned him about specific fighters to watch for. Alexios helped him spar, pointing out weaknesses in his defense. Even Juba, usually competitive, offered advice about reading opponents. They understood what this tournament meant. If Kaveh won, it was proof that freedom was possible, that the arena could be beaten. If he lost, when he lost in most of their minds, it would be a reminder of their own mortality. The tournament's first day arrived. The Colosseum was decorated specially for the occasion, purple and gold banners everywhere, the Emperor's symbols prominently displayed. The crowd was even larger than usual, with every seat filled and thousands more watching from outside, hoping to hear the roars and imagine the action. Kaveh's first match was against a Numidian scissor fighter, a rare style using 2 short blades with tubular handguards. The man was 12-4, experienced and dangerous, his unorthodox weapons difficult to defend against. But Kaveh's enhanced speed gave him an edge. He could track both blades, react to the unusual attack angles, counter when openings appeared. After a fierce 8-minute battle, he caught the Numidian's lead hand, twisted it, and drove his gladius into the man's throat. No mercy granted. The crowd wanted blood in the tournament, and the scissor fighter had no dramatic story to make them feel compassionate. Kaveh's second match, later that afternoon, was against a hoplomachus, a fighter styled after Greek hoplites, with spear and small shield. The spear's reach should have been an advantage, but Kaveh's tactical awareness let him close distance, get inside the spear's effective range, and win through superior close combat skills. This time, mercy was granted. The Hoplomachus had fought beautifully, and the crowd appreciated artistry. Day 1 ended with Kaveh 2-0, one of 32 fighters remaining. Day 2 brought harder challenges. His morning opponent was a veteran Murmillo, heavily armored and methodical. The fight lasted 25 minutes, both fighters exhausted by the end, but Kaveh's conditioning, enhanced by the ancient formula, gave him the edge. He outlasted his opponent, waited for fatigue-induced mistakes, and capitalized. The afternoon match was against a retiarius who'd won 18 of 21 fights. The net fighter's reach and mobility were formidable, but Kaveh had trained extensively against Juba and knew the style's weaknesses. He weathered the initial assault, closed distance when the net was deployed poorly, and ended the fight with a thrust through the retiarius's lightly armored chest. Day 2 ended with 16 fighters remaining. Kaveh was bloodied, exhausted, and beginning to feel the accumulated damage of 4 fights in 2 days. Even his enhanced healing couldn't keep pace with this intensity. That night, he took a triple dose of the formula. Dangerous, possibly reckless, but necessary. His body felt like it was being taken apart and rebuilt, every cell screaming and then quieting, every muscle tearing down and building back stronger. Day 3, quarterfinals. 8 fighters remained, each one a proven champion. Kaveh's morning opponent was Titus of Germania, called the Iron Wall for his impenetrable defense. The fight was brutal. 35 minutes of grinding combat, both fighters looking for any opening, any mistake, any momentary lapse. The crowd grew silent, absorbed by the technical mastery on display. Finally, Kaveh feinted high, drew Titus's shield up, then dove low and cut deeply into the German's leg. Titus fell, unable to continue, and was granted mercy for his valiant effort. 4 fighters remained, Kaveh and 3 others. Crixus the Gaul, undefeated in 30 fights. Priscus of Pompeii, a volunteer gladiator who fought for glory rather than freedom. And Marcus, yes, the bear, the man Kaveh had defeated months ago, fully healed and hungry for revenge. The semifinals would be fought the next morning. Kaveh drew Crixus. Marcus would face Priscus. That night, Kaveh barely slept. His body ached despite the formula. His mind raced with scenarios and strategies, and he felt something he hadn't felt in months. Genuine fear. Crixus was everything a gladiator should be. Strong, fast, skilled, experienced, and utterly ruthless. Dawn came. Kaveh prepared his equipment, checked and rechecked each piece. Then the walk to the Colosseum, the descent into the Hippodrome, the wait in the darkness while the crowd's roar filtered down. His name was called. He ascended into light. Crixus was already on the sand, a mountain of muscle and scar tissue, holding his weapons with casual confidence. He'd killed 43 men in the arena. He'd never been defeated. He'd never shown mercy. The crowd was wild, knowing they were watching something special. The undefeated champion versus the young prodigy. Experience versus enhancement. The old guard versus the new. The signal came. Begin. Crixus attacked immediately. No testing, no probing, just pure aggression backed by perfect technique. His gladius was a blur, his shield an impenetrable wall. He drove Kaveh back across the sand, not giving him space to think or breathe or plan. Kaveh defended desperately. Every block jarred his arms. Every dodge came within inches of being hit. Crixus was better than anyone he'd ever faced, better even than Marcus at his peak. Minutes passed. Kaveh was bleeding from a dozen minor cuts. His defense was cracking. The crowd sensed the end coming. Then something clicked in Kaveh's mind. He remembered the cave, the ancient symbols, the scroll that had given him power. He remembered his father's last words, "Stay alive." He remembered every sacrifice, every pain, every step that had brought him here. He couldn't lose, wouldn't lose, not now, not when freedom was one more fight away. Kava stopped retreating. He roared, a primal sound that echoed across the Colosseum, and attacked with everything he had. He drew on the formula's power, on months of training, on rage and hope and desperate need. He became something more than human for a few crucial seconds, a weapon forged in slavery and sharpened by suffering. His gladius found gaps in Crixus's defense. His shield battered against the Gaul's guard. His speed, enhanced beyond natural limits, let him strike 3 times for every one of Crixus's attacks. The veteran fighter, surprised by this explosion of ferocity, gave ground, then gave more ground. His perfect defense developed cracks. His overwhelming offense became merely strong. They fought for 40 minutes, the longest bout of the tournament. Both warriors were barely standing by the end, both bleeding, both exhausted beyond any reasonable limit. Then Kaveh saw it, a tiny opening, barely there, gone almost before it appeared. He committed everything to one final attack, left himself completely exposed, and drove his gladius with all his remaining strength toward Crixus's neck. The Gaul's shield came up to block, but not quite fast enough. Steel pierced flesh, blood sprayed across white sand. Crixus staggered, dropped his weapons, fell to his knees, his hand clutching a throat that no longer worked properly. Kaveh stood over him, swaying, barely conscious himself. The crowd was silent, shocked that the undefeatable had been defeated. Then they exploded. The roar was like nothing Kaveh had heard before, 50,000 people screaming themselves hoarse, stomping so hard the Colosseum shook, throwing everything they had onto the sand in tribute. Crixus looked up at Kaveh, blood bubbling from his lips, and mouthed 2 words, "Good fight." Then he collapsed, and slaves carried him away. Whether to medical care or to the morgue, Kaveh never learned. Kaveh walked toward the exit on legs that barely functioned, his mind barely processing what had happened. He'd won. He'd defeated the undefeatable. He was in the finals. One more fight, just one more, and he'd be free. Chapter 15. Freedom's Price. The final would be fought the next day, giving combatants minimal time to recover. Kaveh spent the night being tended by Heracles and other medical staff. His wounds were cleaned and bandaged, his exhaustion treated with every remedy available, and he was fed the richest food the ludus could provide. But no amount of treatment could fully restore him after 5 brutal fights in 4 days. His body was breaking down despite the ancient formula's support. Muscles were torn, bones bruised, cuts infected despite cleaning. He'd pushed himself beyond reasonable limits. "You should withdraw," Heracles told him bluntly. "Your body can't take another fight like that. You could die, not from your opponent's blade, but from simple exhaustion and accumulated trauma." "I'm fighting," Kaveh said. "I'm one fight away from freedom. I didn't come this far to quit now." Marcus, the bear, who'd lost his semi-final to Priscus, visited Kaveh that evening. The big man's respect for his former opponent had grown over the months. "Priscus is different from anyone you've faced," Marcus warned. "He's not fighting for freedom. He's already free. He fights because he loves it, because he's good at it, because the crowd's adoration feeds something in him. He has nothing to lose and everything to gain. That makes him dangerous. How do I beat him?" "You don't, probably. He's better than Crixus, better than me, better than anyone currently fighting in Rome. He's won the Emperor's tournament twice before. He only enters every few years for the challenge." Marcus paused. "But if you must fight him, don't try to match his skill. You can't. Instead, survive. Endure. Make it a war of attrition. His conditioning is his weak point. He's 35, and no amount of training fully compensates for age. If you can last long enough, maybe his body gives out before yours does. That night, Kaveh took his last dose of the ancient formula, the very last of what he'd discovered in the hidden cave months ago. He felt the warmth spread through his body one final time, felt his muscles repair and strengthen, felt his mind sharpen and focus. Tomorrow, he'd face Priscus with no enhancements left, just whatever remained of the formula in his blood and the skills he'd developed over a year of training and fighting. Tomorrow he'd win his freedom or die trying. The final day of the Emperor's Games. The Colosseum was more than full. People had bribed guards for standing room, climbed on statues for views, packed every possible space. The Emperor himself sat in the imperial box, surrounded by senators and generals and the elite of Roman society. This was the event of the year. Priscus the champion, beloved by all Rome, against Kaveh the desert lion, the young prodigy who'd risen from nowhere to challenge the best. They entered the arena together, walking side by side across the sand. Priscus was tall and elegant, moving with the grace of a dancer. His equipment gleamed, polished to perfection, every piece the best money could buy. His face was handsome and unscarred, preserved by skill rather than luck. He looked like a hero from legend. Kaveh, beside him, looked like what he was, a slave, scarred and battered, fighting for survival rather than glory. They stopped before the Emperor's box. Domitian, Emperor of Rome, master of the known world, rose from his throne. Gladiators, his voice carried across the Colosseum. You stand before the greatest city ever built, before citizens who have come to witness greatness. Fight well, fight bravely, and whoever stands at the end will receive not just gold and freedom, but eternal glory. Your name will be remembered as long as Rome endures. Now, show us why you deserve that honor. They saluted together. Ave Imperator, those who are about to die salute you. The Emperor sat. Silence fell. 50,000 people holding their breath. The signal came. Begin. Priscus moved like liquid mercury, fast, fluid, impossible to pin down. His attacks came from unexpected angles, his defense was flawless, and he fought with the confidence of someone who'd never lost when it mattered. Kaveh defended as best he could, but within minutes he was bleeding from multiple cuts. Priscus wasn't trying to end the fight quickly. He was putting on a show, demonstrating his superiority, giving the crowd the spectacle they craved. 10 minutes passed. 15. 20. Kaveh was losing by any measure, his defense barely holding, his attacks parried effortlessly. The crowd began to sense the outcome. Their cheers for Priscus grew louder. Surely, they thought, this was almost over. But Kaveh wasn't done. He'd survived chains and stone and death and blood. He'd endured everything Rome could throw at him. He would not break. Not here. Not now. He changed tactics, stopped trying to match Priscus's skill, and instead focused on pure survival. Blocked instead of countering. Moved away instead of engaging. Made Priscus chase him across the sand, expending energy on attacks that hit only air. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't heroic. But it was effective. 30 minutes, 40, 50, an hour, the longest gladiatorial bout in recent memory. Both fighters were exhausted now, both bleeding, both barely standing. Priscus's attacks, while still skilled, came slower. His breathing was labored. Age and exhaustion were taking their toll. Kaveh hurt everywhere. Every movement was agony. His vision swam. He could feel his body shutting down, could feel consciousness slipping away. But he was still standing, still fighting, still refusing to surrender. At 70 minutes, something remarkable happened. Priscus stumbled, just slightly, just for a moment, but enough. His perfect guard dropped a fraction. Kava saw it. Despite exhaustion, despite pain, his enhanced mind, still carrying traces of the ancient formula, processed the opportunity in a split second. He attacked. One final surge, drawing on reserves he didn't know he had, pulling strength from desperation and hope in the memory of everyone he'd lost. His gladius flashed upward, slipped past Priscus's shield, and caught the champion across the upper arm. Blood flowed. Priscus's sword arm was compromised. The crowd gasped. The champion was hurt. The impossible was happening. Priscus fought on, switching his gladius to his left hand, but the injury had shifted the balance. Now it was Kave pressing, attacking, driving the champion back across blood-stained sand. At 85 minutes, both fighters could barely stand. This wasn't skill anymore. It was pure will. Two men refusing to fall while their bodies screamed for relief. Then Kava saw a second opening. He feinted left. Priscus's tired body responded slowly, and Kava drove his shield boss into the champion's face. Priscus's nose shattered. He stumbled backward, dazed. Kava followed. Gladius raised for the killing blow, and stopped. Priscus stood defenseless, too hurt and exhausted to fight back, waiting for death. The crowd screamed for blood, demanded the kill, wanted to see their champion fall. But Kave remembered all the men he'd killed, remembered Spartacus's haunted words about killing because the crowd demanded it, remembered his own village, his own people, killed because Rome demanded it. He lowered his gladius. The crowd went silent, confused, shocked by this display of mercy at the worst possible moment. "Finish it," Priscus gasped through his shattered nose. "I'm defeated. Give them what they want." "No," Kava said. "You fought with honor. You deserve honor in return. I won't kill you to please them." He turned to face the emperor's box, raised his gladius, and waited for judgment. The crowd erupted in chaos, some demanding blood, others crying for mercy, all screaming their opinions at maximum volume. This had never happened before, not in a tournament final, not with the emperor watching. Domitian stood. The crowd gradually quieted, waiting for imperial judgment. The emperor studied the scene, two exhausted fighters, one victorious but refusing to complete his victory, one defeated but granted unexpected mercy. He looked at his advisors, at the crowd, processing politics and optics and precedent. Finally, he spoke, his voice carrying through the Colosseum. "Rarely do we witness such combat. Rarely do we see warriors push themselves beyond all reasonable limits. And even more rarely do we see mercy when blood is demanded." He paused for dramatic effect. "Both fighters have shown courage beyond measure. Both have earned reward. Therefore, both will receive prizes." The crowd's confusion turned to amazement as Domitian continued. "Priscus, you fought as champions do, with skill and honor. You are granted 20,000 denarii and the empire's gratitude. Kave of the East, you have defeated Rome's greatest gladiator and shown mercy that speaks to character as well as skill. You are granted 30,000 denarii and—" He raised a wooden sword, the rudis, the symbol of freedom. "Your freedom, earned before the gods and witnessed by all Rome." The crowd exploded into the loudest roar yet. They'd witnessed something unprecedented, a double honor, a display of imperial generosity, and the rise of a new legend. Kava fell to his knees, not from exhaustion, though he was certainly exhausted, but from the weight of what had just happened. He was free. After years of slavery, after chains and stone and blood, he was finally, actually free. Slaves brought the prizes onto the sand, gold was laid before both fighters, and Domitian himself descended from his box, something emperors rarely did, and placed the wooden rudis in Kava's hands. "Well fought, freedman. Your name will be remembered." Kava tried to speak, failed, tried again. Thank you, Caesar. I am honored beyond words. Use your freedom well. Rome needs men of courage and honor. Perhaps we'll see what you can become when you're not fighting for survival. Then the emperor returned to his box, and guards helped both fighters from the sand. Priscus, despite his defeat, embraced Cave. You earned this, more than I did, truth be told. Go, be free, and never set foot on this sand again if you have any sense. Cave was carried back to the ludus in triumph. His fellow gladiators cheered, genuinely happy that one of their own had achieved what they all dreamed of. Vorenus congratulated him, already calculating how he could use trained by the ludus Vorenus as a marketing tool. Lucius actually smiled. That night, Cave sat alone in what was no longer his cell, but just temporary quarters, holding the wooden rudies and the letters of manumission that declared him legally free. The gold sat in a chest, more money than his entire village had seen in a year. He thought of his father, wondering if the old man still lived, if he'd ever hear that his son had won freedom in Rome's greatest arena. He thought of his mother and sister, of Darius and Zala, and all the slaves he'd known. He thought of the men he'd killed, the blood he'd shed, the price he'd paid for this wooden sword. Was it worth it? He didn't know. Freedom had cost him his innocence, his peace, and pieces of his soul he'd never recover. But he was alive. He was free. And he had resources to build a new life, perhaps even to help others still trapped in slavery. The boy from Palmyra's edge was gone, burned away in the fires that had destroyed his village. The slave who'd broken stone was gone, ground away in the quarries. The gladiator who'd fought for survival was gone, transformed by victory into something new. Now there was just Cave, freedman of Rome, champion of the Colosseum, a man who'd journeyed through hell and emerged with a wooden sword that meant more than any steel blade ever could. His story could have ended here, but fate, as always, had other plans, because in the crowd that day, watching his victory and his mercy, was someone who would change his life again, someone who saw not just a fighter, but a leader, someone with plans that would take Cave far beyond the arena, into politics and intrigue and dangers that made the Colosseum seem simple by comparison. But that, dear listener, is a tale for another night. For now, know this: the slave became a champion, the prisoner became free, and the boy who dreamed of heroes became a hero himself, his name echoing through the streets of Rome and into the annals of history. The desert had forged him, the quarries had tempered him, the arena had tested him, and freedom had claimed him.